The first thing I need to do is run a little test. I have to get it done before the break. I need to restore my awakened spatial power to its full state. Activating infinite storage mode now. Good. The space is truly limitless. I have 0 attack power, and that 1.5-second delay. That's exactly what led to my death. A tragic end during the war. That was the result of my 2 previous rebirths. On the other hand, those official shelters that looked so rudimentary, they held out until the very end thanks to the army's will of steel. Now that I've come back to life again, I realize that individual strength just isn't enough. It's insignificant when facing natural disasters. The only way to survive is to prepare for eternity, and that means emptying the national granaries. I'm going to drain the strategic reserves dry. I'll take advantage of the fact that the zombies haven't evolved yet. I need direct firepower coverage for my mobility. I need to nip the coming chaos in the bud. This is the only right path after my rebirth. So, without a second thought, I picked up my phone and dialed the emergency hotline. Hello, I want to report a major security threat. A massive public event is about to happen. It's coming soon, and it will affect the entire world. Sir, please calm down and explain exactly what is happening. I am a regressor. The end of the world will arrive in exactly 1 month. I have an infinite storage space. I'm asking for help. I need help stocking up on supplies. After I said those words, a heavy silence followed. The operator on the other end of the line just sat there. He clearly thought I was some junkie or a mental patient, but I kept talking. If you think I'm talking nonsense, just write this down. The Joint Military Exercise, code Thunder 24, will take place in next Wednesday. The main objective of the exercise is the testing of a new electromagnetic railgun. The target ship's identification number is Yunshi 09. I hung up and sat quietly on the sofa, waiting for them to arrive. The operator might not know railguns, but that top-secret code name set off alarms. It didn't take long. The screech of tires echoed from the street below my apartment. A column of black vehicles screeched to a halt outside. A squad of fully armed special forces rushed into the building. They kicked in my door and dragged me straight to an interrogation room. The charge? Suspected theft and disclosure of classified state secrets. Wang Yan, 24 years old, logistics clerk, both parents deceased, no criminal record, no history of mental illness. Your resume is clean, spotless, in fact. But that Thunder 24 exercise you mentioned on the emergency line is top secret. Fewer than 20 people in the entire system even know it exists. So tell me, who is your handler? Which agency are you spying for? If I were a spy, would I call the police on myself? I told you, Chief Lee, I'm a regressor. Look, I read web novels too, but national security relies on evidence, not fairy tales. I let out a soft laugh. You think this is just my imagination? Chief Lee, you have a daughter studying at the university. In Moda City, right? The day the apocalypse breaks out, she'll call you from the library. But before she can even finish her sentence, a mutated classmate of hers will tear her throat out. Before I could even finish, Chief Lee stood up abruptly, staring me down. That's his private life. Hardly anyone knows he even has a daughter in Modu. Are you threatening me? He growled. No, I'm just stating the facts. You're the one who told me the story about your daughter in the first place. I'm trying to save the future. In my past life, you were a man with a warrior's soul. A hero who charged into a horde of corpses strapped with high-grade explosives. I have nothing but respect for that man. I truly do. Lee was stunned. The sorrow and weariness in my eyes weren't something I could fake. You claim to have a space that can hold the whole country? Fine, prove it. 5 minutes later, we were at the National Security Bureau's secret training ground. Chief Lee stood right beside me, waiting. He pointed straight ahead toward a parked anti-riot armored vehicle. That machine weighs nearly 7 tons, and since you claim your space is infinite, make it disappear. I didn't hesitate and slowly walked up to the armored beast. I reached out and touched the cold, rough metal of the hull. With a single thought, I gave the command. In the blink of an eye, the massive armored vehicle vanished into thin air. The spot where it stood was now nothing but an empty concrete slab. Everyone's brain seemed to freeze in that exact moment. Chief Lee's jaw dropped in pure disbelief. He rushed forward like a madman. He waved his hands and stomped on the empty ground, trying to find a trick. He thought it was some kind of holographic projection. The car, where the hell is the car? It's right here with me. I tapped my temple and asked, want me to bring it back? Do it. Let me see it one more time. A second later, the armored vehicle reappeared on the empty slab right next to him. Lee's entire worldview collapsed. Supernatural power was real. If my power is real, then is the apocalypse I predicted real too? Chief, my voice snapped him out of his trance. This is just the beginning, and you're not the one I need to talk to. That vehicle was nothing more than a demonstration of what I can do. I need to see the top officials. We're running out of time. Yes, you're right. This has to be done. He knew this had to be reported to his superiors immediately. He swallowed his pride and pushed aside his ego. With a trembling hand, he pulled out an encrypted red phone and dialed a mysterious number. Sir, this is Lee from State Security. I need a moment of your time. I'm requesting the immediate activation of the maximum emergency plan. Everything he said is true. Shortly after that, Chief Lee took me to a secure facility for a high-stakes truth serum and polygraph test. It was the most advanced physical screening in the country. The needles on the machine meant to detect the slightest lie. Didn't even twitch. Not even by a single inch. Next came a grueling series of tests that finally yielded results. They produced 4 experimental reports on my ability. First, the interior of my storage space has perfect consistency, maintaining a completely constant temperature. It even has anti-corrosive properties. Second, it cannot contain any living animals. Third, using it consumes my own mental power. I get a sharp warning of fatigue when I push too hard. Fourth, I can collect anything through physical contact or conscious coverage. Meanwhile, inside the Supreme Command meeting room, an old man sat at the head of the table, his hair white as snow. I stood before them, my posture as straight as an unsheathed blade. The old man spoke. You've all seen the video, the psych evaluations, and the ability reports. The future intel provided by Comrade Wang Yin sounds like a fairy tale, but facts are facts. The most advanced lie detection technology in the world cannot prove him wrong. Our psychological experts have conducted a comprehensive review. They believe the reliability of his claims is as high as 99.99%. 99%. Since the apocalypse is coming, then we move forward. Our nation has endured for thousands of years. What storm have we not weathered? At that moment, the encrypted red phone inside the secure box was disconnected. The indicator light flashed as an aide announced, Chief, Wang Yin is requesting a video link. He was approaching. I greeted the chief and the leaders, showing neither humility nor arrogance as I looked them in the eye. Comrade Wang, we recognize your ability, but your plan is simply too vast. There is one question I must ask on behalf of everyone present. Why empty the strategic reserves now? Those resources are already secure where they are. Isn't keeping them there the same as establishing and guarding a line of defense? A large-scale transfer like this would consume the very foundation of our economy. I gave a bitter smile, thinking, guard them? The red mist treats everyone equally. In my previous life, on July 15th, the red mist fell for 7 consecutive days. During the first week after it ended, a massive tide of corpses erupted everywhere. The world collapsed like a house of cards in a 3D nightmare. Densely populated cities became death traps. They will fall completely within 72 hours. By the following week, the intensity of the corpse tide will surge to a new level. Once the apocalypse begins, over 80% of the land will become a pandemic-forbidden zone. We cannot simply build life-sustaining shelters on the fly. Every single stronghold needs perfect protective installations ready beforehand. If we don't move these resources now, we lose them forever. In 1 month, all this food will be rotting away. The ammunition, the production lines, all of it. Will they all just become burial offerings for zombies and mutant beasts? We won't even be able to get close to them. The only way out is to establish these specialized, fully equipped facilities. 2 underground bunkers with internal air circulation to block the red mist virus. We use that preserved productivity to counterattack and rebuild civilization. A deathly silence filled the conference room. Everyone understood this wasn't a joke or a bluff. This wasn't just about construction. It was about saving the spark of humanity. The old man closed his eyes for 5 full seconds, and when he opened them, they were bloodshot. I saw the turmoil in his gaze shift into pure determination and courage. The fire was already lit. Believing it or not doesn't matter. We cannot gamble the lives of 1.4 billion people. Even if there is only a 1 in 10,000 chance this is false, we can't risk it. The old man stood up abruptly, hands slammed on the table, and barked, I order it. With a sharp snap, everyone in the room stood at attention. He launched Dacia's highest-level emergency response, codenamed Shangri-La. No matter the price, no matter the cost, use every ounce of state power to stockpile resources like mad. Second, begin the construction of the Shangri-La strongholds immediately. Headquarters is taking full control of the safety zone's construction planning. Comrade Wang Yin is appointed as special advisor with full operational authority. He now holds the supreme power over all resource allocation. Third, every single grain storage facility in the national accounts is to be opened. The strategic meat reserves and the national medicine stockpiles are completely unlocked and open to Wang Yin without condition. Even if he wants to take my desk, tear it down and give it to him, we must create a sanctuary from the storm for millions of our people. Do I make myself clear? A roar rose straight to the sky as the state machinery began to grind into gear. 3 hours later, at a certain national strategic reserve warehouse in the north, the massive grain silos of northern Dacia stood waiting as a convoy, escorted by a fleet of attack helicopters, arrived exactly on time and screeched to a halt before the warehouse gates. I stepped out of the car, and even with the memories of my past life, the sheer scale of it all hit me. I stood there, completely stunned by the scene unfolding before my eyes. Right here, right now, lay an ocean of grain and survival. The entire place operated like a massive assembly line. Enormous cylindrical silos dominated the landscape, rising up to bridge the gap between heaven and earth. Each silo stood dozens of meters high, a true scientific miracle. It was the peak of industrial civilization, perfectly fused with our agricultural heritage. Millions of tons of grain were gathered here, stockpiled and ready as the countdown begins. In my past life, people fought to the death over a single bag of moldy flour, leaving a dozen survivors broken and bleeding, driven to the brink of madness just to stay alive. But now, this entire mountain of resources belonged to me. The commander stood before me and saluted. Comrade Wang Yan. The logistics team had finally arrived, all of them clad in full combat gear, standing right there by my side. This veteran soldier, a man who had weathered 1,000 storms, looked out at the endless rows of grain warehouses stretching into the distance. Right in front of him, and his throat tightened with emotion. They never expected the higher-ups to react so quickly and draft a response plan immediately. This was Warehouse Zone Number 1, a facility built with specialized technology, holding a total capacity of 1.5 million tons of grain. At standard transport speeds, it would take days and nights to move it all by train. The commander, Li Gaodong, turned his gaze toward me. His eyes were filled with expectation, but also a sharp sting of disbelief. Are you sure this will work? He asked. This isn't just some armored vehicle. The soldiers guarding the perimeter also cast curious glances at me. To them, the orders from above seemed like some kind of game. They saw an ordinary young man who was supposed to make this entire warehouse disappear. The idea was simply too fantastic to believe. I didn't waste time on small talk and just took a deep breath. The air around me felt heavy, charged with a faint, shimmering light. The scent of raw rice filled my lungs, the most primitive smell of life itself. It was time to move mountains. I let out a wild, exuberant smile, a savage glint flashing in my eyes. Commander Lee, I think you still misunderstand the meaning of the word infinite. I marched toward the giant silo with long, confident strides. I pressed my palm against the cold metal wall and let my aura explode outward. Envelop, lock on, and copy. A surging tide of power instantly swallowed the steel beast and the mountains of gold inside. Target locked. Grain silo integrity at 100%. Containment complete. Reception confirmed. Then, a dull thud echoed through the air. A sonic boom erupted as the air rushed to fill the void, and every eye on the field widened. Were they actually seeing this? A giant silo, 10 meters wide, dozens of meters high, standing as majestic as a fortress tower. The structure and the thousands of tons of grain inside simply evaporated into thin air. The massive shadow of the silo vanished. The setting sun, no longer blocked by the steel giant, suddenly hit the ground. The blinding light stung everyone's eyes. Nothing remained but a massive circular concrete base. Dust swirled in the empty sky where the building had just stood. A young soldier nearby began to tremble violently. The strap of his rifle nearly slipped right off his shoulder. Commander Lee stood with his mouth agape, gasping for air in the sudden silence. His skin crawled. Was this the power of a god? But I wasn't finished yet. I didn't stop to admire my work or wait for their praise. I marched toward the next silo as if I were merely taking a stroll. I walked as if through my own garden until I reached the second silo. A single touch, and it vanished. Then the third, another touch. Contact, disappearance. One after another, accompanied by thunderous sonic booms, my targets were being cleared out. These massive symbols of the country's wealth were being systematically erased. It was like watching a pencil drawing being rubbed away by an eraser. They were wiped from the horizon in 5 minutes. Only 5 minutes. Storage area number 1 was gone. The space where these giants once stood was now completely hollow. What was once a crowded skyline became an empty plain. 150,000 tons of grain, all secured in my space. I finally came to a halt, but I wasn't even winded. There wasn't even a single drop of sweat on my forehead. I turned around and looked back at them. The warehouse staff and the soldiers stood there, completely petrified. The glow of the setting sun washed over me, stretching my shadow long across the concrete. I casually brushed the dust off my hands and looked at Commander Lee. Next location, I said, as Lee's throat tightened in a hard swallow. He struggled to find his voice. He stared at the empty warehouse, his heart racing, with the raw terror of the coming apocalypse. But suddenly, that fear began to fade, replaced by something else. An unprecedented surge of frenzy and heroic resolve took hold. With power like this at our disposal, and the full backing of the state, the apocalypse could go to hell. Chapter 6. National Treasures, Packed and Gone. Commander Lee suddenly snapped into a perfect military salute, his voice raspy and loud. Counselor Su, this was only storage area number 1. The other sectors are right behind it. Furthermore, the reports coming in are getting more intense. The Department of Agriculture is ready, and the military industry just sent an urgent dispatch. Commander Lee's eyes were burning with a new fire. He fixed his gaze on me. The brand new, fully integrated production line for the JE-20 fighter jets, along with the entire corresponding ammunition stockpile. They are asking if you can take it all. Can your space really hold it all? The corners of my mouth curled into a smirk. My eyes burned with a new, sharp ambition. Tell them to bring it on. The more they have, the better. Forget the JE-20, even if it were the king of the skies himself. If it's meant to protect our people, I'll pack it away. With the food reserves secured, the military factory was my next stop. The night was pitch black, like an anchor dropped in the deep. Searchlights crisscrossed over the facility, turning night into day. This was the heart of the Republic's aviation industry. The final assembly line for the J-20 fighter jets sat right here. This top-secret national site was now surrounded by 3 layers of blockades. Armed soldiers were stationed every few paces, standing guard. Not a single soul could slip through. The atmosphere was suffocatingly tense. The dragon's nest had been emptied, and every engineer evacuated to safety. Report, a voice barked. Preparations for the Pili ammunition transfer are complete. Commander Lee hung up the radio and walked toward me with purpose. Commander Lee looked at me, the fervor in his eyes nearly overflowing after leaving the grain silos. We had driven here without a single stop. Consultant Wong, right ahead are the 2 final assembly lines for the J-20. Lee lowered his voice, his tone thick with suppressed pride and excitement. The entire facility spans 1.5 kilometers, with tens of thousands of high-energy components. This is our crown jewel. I looked in the direction he pointed, toward the massive factory floor. It looked like a sleeping steel beast, even from this distance. I could feel the raw industrial power radiating from the structure. In my previous life, things were different. After humanity retreated into the underground cities, building even one fighter jet was impossible. The sky had become a playground for mutant flyers. But in this life, I'm taking the wyvern and its entire nest with me. Over there on the table, you can see the inventory list. Lee pointed toward a desk nearby. It detailed everything ready for deep storage transport. Deep down, the various logistics were already being coordinated. Lee's face was flushed with a heated intensity. The Thunder manifest was massive. It contained enough equipment, missiles, and hardware to arm a small nation. There were enough specialized aerial bombs to arm 3 entire flight squadrons. I looked down from above, my only goal being to take as much as possible. I let out a smile, one that carried a trace of the madness and dominance from my past life. In my dictionary, the word apocalypse doesn't mean scarcity. It doesn't mean not enough. It means everything, and before the thought even finished, I moved into position. I strode toward that massive General Assembly workshop, passing rows of soldiers and technicians. The surrounding medical staff had already been briefed on the situation. They were operating under the highest level of classified instructions. They knew something incomprehensible was about to happen, but they still looked anxious. They wanted to see it with their own eyes. Their gazes were filled with curiosity and doubt. Could this young man really do it? Was I really going to make an entire production line vanish? This wasn't a sci-fi movie. This was reality, even if it looked like fiction to them. Ignoring their stares, I walked straight to the alloy door, which was over 1/2 meter thick. I reached out and pressed my palm against the surface. My skin made contact with the cold, hard metal. An invisible wave instantly rippled out from my hand. My mental strength surged forward. It poured into the machinery like liquid mercury. My power surged along the alloy door, pouring wildly into the massive factory, flooding the mechanical arms and conveyors. I mapped every precision tool, every sensor, and tens of thousands of modules. The entire facility was being scanned by my mind. Kilometers of machinery were now etched into my consciousness. Every piece was clearly marked and locked in. The target was the entire General Assembly production line. Integrity check, 100%. The collection began deep within my mind, feeling like stars flickering out one by one as I took them. It was a strange, intoxicating sensation. I was securing these apocalyptic assets right under the noses of the military. This massive structure, a factory the size of several football fields, along with everything it contained, began to vanish. The center of the room started to fade, as if wiped away by an invisible eraser. The heavy machinery turned transparent before disappearing into thin air. Boom, boom, boom. The heavy vibrations echoed as the weight shifted. And just like that, the entire line was gone. The air inside the facility lost its containment. It exploded violently in every single direction, forming a massive, crushing shockwave. A cloud of dust erupted as the very foundations of the earth shattered. The space once filled with life was now hollow. Only a haunting, empty void remained. Right where the factory had stood, inside the entire weapons plant, you could have heard a pin drop. Everything seemed frozen in time. 1 second, I held on to every possibility in my mind. The onlookers were paralyzed with shock, unable to move a muscle. The officer in charge of the guard stood there, stunned. The binoculars slipped from his hand, hitting the ground with a dull thud. He didn't even notice, whispering, "No, this isn't a magic trick." But I wasn't finished yet. Saran's voice suddenly snapped everyone back to reality. To his utter amazement, I turned around and headed toward the kingdom. I set my sights on the ammunition depot nearby, a semi-hidden underground fortress. The entrance was sealed with thick layers of concrete and steel plates designed to survive bunker busters. I didn't even bother getting close, stopping exactly 50 meters from the entrance. I simply raised my hand and aimed at that indestructible military stronghold from a distance. Since it's an ammo dump, I decided I might as well take the whole thing with me. My mental force surged forward, piercing through the heavy structural layers. It bypassed the reinforced concrete of future generations, wrapping around the entire interior. I felt every row of neatly stacked missiles and every dangerously shimmering aerial bomb. The transport rails and every single crate were locked into my mental grip. I gave the command, receive. Boom. A sound deeper and more muffled than before echoed as the earth shook violently. That massive underground fortress, the strongest on the planet, began to shift. It felt as if an invisible giant hand had reached down and ripped the earth apart. A massive chunk of the world was gone, leaving a hole dozens of meters deep. The edges of the crater were as smooth as a polished mirror. The bottom of the pit was completely hollow, leaving the onlookers gasping for air. If making the production line disappear was shocking, this was something else entirely. Erasing an entire fortified bunker from a distance is pure, unadulterated terror. Every single eye was fixed on me, trembling with fear. The expressions on their faces shifted instantly. In a heartbeat, the atmosphere changed completely. The curiosity they felt before was gone. It was replaced by pure respect, bordering on terror. I pulled my hand back and scanned the crowd, watching their reactions. I turned toward Chief Lee, my face remaining perfectly calm. I acted as if I had just done something completely insignificant. I told him to make his report to the High Command immediately. I confirmed that the nation's vital equipment was now fully packed away. I said, "We can move on to the next location now." Lee stood there like a statue before finally snapping out of it. He looked at my young but hardened face, and the respect in his heart surged. His hand was trembling as he reached into his pocket. He pulled out the encrypted red phone to make the call. His voice wasn't just loud and raspy this time. It was filled with the raw excitement of a man witnessing history. Reporting to command, he barked into the receiver. Longxiang base is secure. Everything, and I mean everything, is gone. He didn't even wait for them to ask. Chief Lee took a deep, shaky breath. He filled his lungs and started shouting at the top of his voice. Deep inside a certain underground command center, located within the military region, what was once a wartime headquarters had been repurposed. It was now the beating heart of Project JR. The atmosphere was thick with tension. Red data flashed across the electronic screens, blindingly bright. The air was heavy, smelling faintly of apples, mixed with the stale tobacco of powerful men working 72 hours straight. The old man at the head of the table tapped the wood, his voice steady as a rock. "Give me the report," he commanded. An officer stepped forward, his eyes bloodshot from exhaustion. His voice trembled with pure adrenaline. As of 1 hour ago, 5 major strategic granaries, 3 massive frozen meat reserves, and 12 cold storage units, filled with combat-ready supplies, have been completely emptied. A collective, sharp intake of breath echoed through the room. The entire meeting hall fell into a stunned silence. It had already been done. The information had circulated through community documents before, but now, the top leader was announcing it in person. The impact was massive, all while I received support from Comrade N. We successfully transferred dozens of essential national industrial assets, including the entire J-20 production line and its components. We even secured the core parts for the electromagnetic catapults. And it didn't stop there. Several heads of department from the heavy machinery production divisions were moved too. The report continued. The officer spoke with a raw, electric excitement that he could barely keep under control. The old general couldn't help himself. He slammed his hand onto his thigh. Those last 3 assets were the most critical of all. On the final day, we managed to pack up a fifth of our entire national arsenal. But then, right at that exact moment, a sudden, sharp cough shattered the heated atmosphere from the end of the table. A middle-aged man with slicked back hair and framed glasses stood there. He adjusted his glasses slowly and deliberately. Benji Ango, Deputy Director of the National Development and Reform Commission, a high-ranking official in charge of resource allocation. He looked at me with a calm but condescending arrogance, acknowledging my efficiency. "Aren't we being a bit too impulsive?" he asked, and the atmosphere froze. "Colleagues, I recognize our comrades' capabilities on the ground. It's truly astonishing, but this is simply too much." He was referring to the chaos of the last few days. "We have mobilized nearly 1/10 of the military forces, escorting and clearing paths while consuming astronomical resources. More importantly, we are reaching a breaking point." As he questioned the resource transfer, he shifted his gaze toward N. The arrogance in his eyes was impossible to miss. "I can't hide it from you, comrades. This apocalypse you're talking about is nothing but a story. The development of our country relies on scientific foundations and rigorous, long-term planning. I cannot agree to gamble the fate of this nation on a single prediction, especially the prediction of one young man," he added, his voice sharpening. "And this so-called spatial ability, what if it has hidden side effects? Or worse, what if he simply runs away with our national assets? More importantly, he's just a young man whose political screening isn't even finished. Giving him supreme power over resource allocation is dangerous. It's a gamble we can't afford to take." The atmosphere in the conference room turned ice-cold instantly. Shin Jiangwo's words had just thrown my entire plan into the fire. He wasn't questioning my abilities. He was attacking my motives. He was questioning my loyalty to the nation. Suddenly, Li Guodong slammed his fist onto the table with a violent crash. His eyes were wide with fury as he glared at the director. "What exactly are you trying to say?" he barked. "Comrade Wang, Yin has handed over everything he has to the state. His life, his secrets, his power, and you're sitting here spewing this nonsense?" "Old Li, sit down," the elder ordered in a low, heavy voice. But even as he spoke, his sharp gaze never left Shin Jiangwo. "I am talking about protocol," Shin Jiangwo sneered back. "I propose the immediate creation of an expert panel to conduct a full risk assessment on Wang Yin. Until we have those results, we need to look at the details. All current actions must be put on hold. We must strip him of his allocation power and hand it to a professional team." I didn't say a word, simply watching Shin Jiangwo with a cold, silent stare. My gaze was as calm as stagnant water. Strip me of my power. With only 27 days left, did they really think they had time for red tape? I didn't even spare a glance for Shin Jiangwo. I simply stood up slowly and walked toward the massive blue glass window. Director Shun, you think I'm just telling stories, don't you? Shin Jiangwo sneered back at me. State affairs are not child's play, and we cannot act on unverified predictions. We cannot plunge the entire country into a state of panic or cause unnecessary losses based on a whim. A cold light flashed in my eyes. I raised my finger and pointed outside. Down there, the 2024 transport fleet was moving. Those trucks were carrying the raw materials, special-grade alloys destined for the military factories to forge tank armor. Everyone in the room instinctively looked out the window as the vehicles roared past. Even through the thick, reinforced glass, the power was undeniable. The very ground beneath the building was vibrating. My gaze remained fixed on the horizon. I pressed my right hand firmly against the cold surface of the glass. I pressed my palm against the glass, challenging life itself. A heavy, muffled thud echoed through the room. The massive conference room windows rattled violently. Outside, the enormous strategic transport vehicle, along with all the resources it carried, and the specialized alloys packed inside the cabin, instantly vanished from everyone's sight. It was as if using my infinite storage was as easy as breathing. The truck was wiped from existence, leaving nothing on the road but 2 faint tire tracks in the winter frost. A heavy silence followed. A deathly quiet filled the entire conference hall. Everyone stood there, completely stunned. Even the high-ranking old man couldn't hide his shock. Seeing it once was worth more than hearing about it 100 times. It was the first time they had seen me demonstrate this power in person. They stared out at the empty street where the truck had been. Their eyes darted from the window back to me. They looked at my calm, unwavering face. Not a single ripple of emotion showing on my skin. Their entire worldview had just suffered an unprecedented shock. One man collapsed into his chair as the night wind howled outside, his face turning a ghostly, sickly pale. His forehead was drenched in a cold sweat. He didn't move a muscle. He couldn't wrap his head around what he had just witnessed. The director of the supply chain looked like he'd seen a ghost. I looked at them and thought, still have any bright ideas? I pulled my hand back and asked, can you evaluate my abilities now? Congratulations to everyone. The world is about to change, and we're out of time. The old man stood up abruptly, his gaze sweeping across the entire hall. Finally, his eyes locked onto Shun Jiangao. Jiangao, I heard your doubts earlier, he said. Now, you can see for yourself that the world is changing. The old man's voice was deep and heavy with authority. Every word he spoke carried the weight of absolute national interest. Any selfishness or individual behavior that hinders our survival will be punished with the utmost severity. Then he looked at me with a gaze full of pride and unwavering trust. Comrade Wang Yan, your authorization remains the highest in the land. Every previous directive remains in full effect. Yes, sir, the director replied loudly, looking at me with a new expression. His eyes were filled with pure admiration and fanatical devotion. I nodded, knowing I had won this battle because seeing is believing. This live demonstration had successfully intimidated and silenced every potential doubter. Chief, I have one more thing, I said, giving the room no time to recover. I didn't let them catch their breath before dropping the next bombshell. I pulled up a blueprint of the National Underground Pipeline Network and air raid shelters. I added a population map accurate down to the smallest village and asked, what's the plan? The surface is only the first battlefield, I said, my eyes gleaming with a deep light. These underground spaces will be our final bastions as a human race. We have to plan ahead. We have to transform them now. We will turn them into a true Great Wall beneath the earth. The old man slammed his hand down heavily on the table. Organize the task force immediately, he commanded. I turned around and looked out the window once more. The night was pitch black. I knew this was only the beginning of the countdown. The real challenge of the apocalypse is still waiting for us. The threat is far more than just zombies, I thought to myself. In the memories of my previous life, the horrors were endless. Beyond the undead, there were monsters evolving in the shadows. The weather conditions alone were enough to kill, but the most terrifying thing was the human heart, turning colder than any corpse. Chiefly, we need to accelerate the material transfers immediately, I said. I looked at Li Gaodong with a heavy, solemn gaze. I needed the nuclear reactor core generators moved. Every massive machine capable of producing power had to be secured. These are the final seeds of human civilization. They are our only hope against the apocalypse. Li Gaodong stood there, completely stunned by the scale of my request. I was essentially asking to rip the heart and lungs out of the country. Understood, he finally replied. His voice was steady and resolute. There wasn't a hint of hesitation left in his eyes. Outside the conference hall, the night wind howled like a warning. The true national war for survival was only just beginning. As the strategic meeting finally came to a close, the entire state machine began to grind forward at an unprecedented speed. My position in the country was now completely stabilized. No one dared to question my authority anymore. But the victory champagne hadn't even been poured yet. There was no time to celebrate with the end-of-the-month countdown looming. The deadline hung over our heads like a guillotine. Doomsday Countdown, Day 26. The council was in session. Here is the distribution map and detailed data for every nuclear power plant in the nation. A massive holographic projection map unfurled right in front of me. 10 specific names were highlighted. Each one marked a critical location. Li Gaodong pointed to the key positions of the nuclear plants on the map. His expression was grave as he focused on the heart of the grid. The reactor cores are of the highest importance, but their structures are massive. The systems are incredibly complex. The radiation levels are enormous, and the difficulty of the task is the dismantling process alone. And the transport will be extremely dangerous. I know, I said, staring at a single glowing point on the map. It was a major nuclear plant located on the East Sea coast. We don't have the luxury of a standard dismantling procedure. It's a beast of steel. The internal structure is massive, complex, and packed with raw energy. The sheer weight of a single nuclear reactor often reaches several thousand tons, protected by a massive protein shield. The radiation shielding alone is several meters thick. Then, we do a complete relocation. My voice was calm, but carried an undeniable firmness. It's the fastest way. It's the best way. The most efficient method is the only one that guarantees we can contain it. But, Advisor Sue, the nuclear radiation is a major problem. A nuclear physics expert stood up and took a moment to address us. His face was etched with fear as he spoke, but I cut him off. Don't worry, my space ignores the laws of physics. Radiation cannot penetrate it, but as a safety precaution, all personnel involved in the cleanup and escort must wear full protective gear. Highest level hazmat suits only. During the operation, the nuclear plant will undergo an emergency shutdown. We have to reduce the risk of fatalities to the absolute minimum. I looked at Li Gaodong, team leader Li. Relay the orders. Every nuclear plant in the country goes to maximum alert status immediately. Cleanup, lockdown, only the core technical personnel stay to assist as we start with the world's most vital plant, Donghe. It was time. Li Gaodong immediately grabbed the encrypted phone and began barking orders. 3 hours later, the Donghe nuclear plant loomed ahead, its massive cooling towers piercing the sky. Steam swirled violently in the air. The entire Ideo district was under total lockdown. Security checkpoints were backed up layer after layer. I walked forward, followed closely by Li Gaodong and a handful of the plant's chief engineers. Even through their masks, I could see the expressions on the engineers' faces. Cold sweat was beaded on their foreheads. We stood before reactor number 1. The chief engineer pointed toward the pinnacle of their technology. The building stood before me, encased in thick layers of concrete and reinforced steel. His voice trembled as he explained it was 30 meters high and 20 meters wide, housing a gas reactor. The core weight alone was staggering. The total mass was estimated at 30,000 tons, and that wasn't even counting the various safety infrastructures, the auxiliary systems, and the massive containment shell. 30,000 tons. The sheer scale of it was overwhelming. Li Gaodong's eyes narrowed as he watched me. I stepped toward the wall. I pulled off my gloves and touched the cold, rough concrete. As my palm made contact, my consciousness surged out like a tidal wave, enveloping, penetrating, locking on. Then a sharp pain stabbed deep into my brain. This time was different. The space within my dimension was resisting the massive weight. I realized that containing something of this level would drain me. It was consuming too much of my mental strength. I took a deep breath and pushed my mental energy to the limit, shaping my consciousness into a single point. An immense, invisible net wrapped around the reactor core, layer after layer. Then came the thundering boom. It didn't just vanish instantly this time. Instead, the entire Earth began to shake violently. The Ideo district trembled as if the tectonic plates were fracturing beneath my feet. In the distance, the steam from the cooling towers spiraled out of control. A sharp, piercing hiss filled the air. The soldiers surrounding the island district braced themselves. The first time I saw something like this, I was just a child. Now, the entire massive frame of this enormous nuclear reactor began to shift and uncoil. I focused, moving slowly, inch by inch. It started floating upward, as if being hoisted by a giant. An invisible hand ripped it from its foundations, the concrete shell tearing apart. A shrill, metallic screech echoed through the facility. Debris and dust cascaded down like a waterfall. This is nothing short of a miracle, the chief engineer stammered. He covered his mouth in shock, trembling. In his entire life, he never could have imagined that he would witness such a sight. Li Gaodong clenched his fists tight. His grip was so intense that his knuckles turned white. His focus entirely locked on the scene before him. I am a man carrying the weight of the world. Amidst the violent tremors rocking the city center, the main body of the nuclear reactor finally broke free. It separated completely from the Earth, floating in midair with a deafening crash, a monster of tens of thousands of tons. Thousands of tons suspended in the air suddenly felt weightless. The vision before me began to unfold. The space around it briefly distorted and blurred. And then, just like that, the massive structure was gone, leaving nothing behind but a gaping, hollow crater in the ground. The dust settled, no longer floating. The air was thick with a heavy, metallic scent. The smell of raw earth and scorched steel filled my lungs. The violent tremors shaking the nuclear plant finally stopped. Everything fell into a deathly silence as I slowly lowered my head. I wiped my brow with a trembling hand. Beads of cold sweat were dripping down my face. This time, the mental toll was staggering. It was far more exhausting than moving the entire aircraft factory. Li Gaodong rushed toward me, his face pale with worry. He looked like he had just seen a god descend to earth. "I'm fine," I muttered, my voice barely a whisper. I waved my hand to dismiss his concerns. I took a long, deep breath to steady my racing heart. My gaze sharpened as I regained my focus. Even a massive beast like this, I can tuck it away in my storage just fine. Next, I stared into that immense crater as a surge of pride swelled in my chest. This is what it truly means to move mountains and drain the seas. Over the next 10 days, I became an unstoppable force, clearing the map. I drifted from the East Sea to the remote mountains of the Southwest, from nuclear facilities to massive hydroelectric dams. In just 10 days, I hit over 90 targets. The nation's nuclear plants and key hydroelectric components were all secured. I put them all under my protection, securing our post-apocalyptic energy and the country's industrial lifeline. Chapter 9. They're panicking. Now, I'm going to show you how it's done. I'll take everything, the people and the ships. The United States is in a panic. Is this a secret military import from the East China Sea? I stared at the screen in the command room below. A dozen red dots represented the two of them. As the lights flashed frantically, a cold smirk played on my lips. "Our movements are too big," Li Gaodong said, pointing at the map. His voice wavered, but my own gaze remained fixed with relentless determination. Emptying grain depots, moving heavy industry lines, and especially the mass disappearance of power plants. On satellite images, it looks like the Earth is being swallowed by a global surveillance system. The Americans aren't blind. They've realized a massive internal shift is happening within our borders. Sugyurin stood by my side, her expression perfectly calm. I haven't closed my eyes once over the last few days, moving from one energy core to the next. I was flown here by special aircraft to secure this specific port shipment before it could be exported. We're talking the pinnacle of national manufacturing, precision machine tools, and core lithography components, plus tens of thousands of tons of specialized steel packed into the shipment. In my past life, these national treasures were all destroyed, lost forever in the apocalyptic chaos. Or worse, they fell into the hands of foreigners. But this time, I'm taking every last bit. They wouldn't dare. Not directly, anyway. They're only using their established networks for now, disguising their vessels as merchant ships to conduct close-range reconnaissance. The operations staff officer reported that 3 of those ships are carrying missiles and supplies. They're prepping for an operation. The CIA is a bunch of clowns, Li Gaodong said with pure disdain, his gaze sharpening. I looked out the window at the massive industrial landscape below. Rows upon rows of packed containers stretched across the port, stacked as neatly as a set of brushes. They looked like soldiers in formation, waiting for inspection. I looked at Li Gaodong and told him we were out of time. We had to act before things went south. Li Gaodong nodded, grabbed the radio, and spoke with a cold, steady voice. "Close the net. Move out." It was finally starting. "All units, listen up. Protecting the battery is your primary objective. Sugyurin's safety is the absolute priority. If she loses a single hair, I'm holding every one of you responsible. Understood?" The port looked deserted. Only the salt-heavy sea breeze whistled through the docks. The metal groaned under the wind, but Sugyurin knew the truth. In the shadow of every container and atop every towering crane, the elite were waiting. The top marksmen of the Longya Special Forces were already in position. This was a carefully laid trap for our uninvited guests. I walked slowly toward a specific container. I reached out my hand toward the steel wall marked with fragile, precision instruments. I prepared myself for the containment process to begin. Right at that moment, the silence broke. 3 silenced tranquilizer darts hissed through the air in a triangular formation. The darts streaked from 3 impossible angles towards Sugyurin's back. They moved with the speed of a lethal tongue, a coordinated, deadly assault. However, as the tranquilizer needles drew within 2 meters of her, it was as if they slammed into a solid wall. They froze instantly in midair against an invisible barrier before dropping. They hit the ground with a dull thud. Sugyurin didn't even bother to look back. Almost at the same moment, from 3 different directions in the port, the muffled cracks of suppressed gunfire rang out in rapid succession. The Longya snipers had opened fire simultaneously. The counterattack had officially begun. 3 observers from the enemy squad, who thought they were perfectly hidden, were struck down in the shadows, dead instantly, their lives snuffed out before they could blink. The battle erupted in an instant. Right then, boom, the lid of a nearby container was blown clean off, the one closest to Sugyurin. The metal was ripped away violently as 8 SEAL members burst out. They were clad in sleek black diving suits, fully armed and ready for blood. They gripped MP-5 submachine guns tight. Muzzles flashed as they unleashed a hail of lead towards Sugyurin's position. They weren't aiming to kill her just yet. It was indiscriminate suppression fire, meant to pin her down. They wanted to create an opening for the second team, and it worked. Under the cover of the chaotic gunfire, 4 more figures moved. Men in black, agile as ghosts, slipped through the smoke. They lunged out of the shadows, charging straight for Sugyurin. Their speed had already surpassed the limits of any normal human. I gave the order. Protect Advisor Sugurin. 10 remote-controlled machine gun turrets rose from the ground. They opened fire simultaneously with a deafening roar. A lethal rain of bullets began to dance across the port. The crossfire formed a web of death, tearing the 8 SEAL members to shreds. Suddenly, the sky above emitted a terrifying, high-pitched hum. 100 small attack drones, each the size of a fist, swarmed the air. They swarmed like a hive, locking onto the 4 men in black with lethal precision. One of them managed to dodge 3 drones, but the 4th caught him off guard. A high-voltage current surged through him as the drone detonated, leaving his body convulsing on the ground before another man in black stepped up. He swatted a drone out of the air with a single strike, but it was useless. A second later, 7 or 8 drones slammed into him all at once. They exploded into a massive fireball, turning the fight into a total slaughter. This is the power of national-level industry, a literal dimensional strike. Against small-scale special operations, I stood my ground from the very beginning, not even needing to move my feet. I even had the luxury of pitying them for trying to face high-tech weaponry with mere flesh and blood. They must have been begging for a miserable death, so I raised my hand and let my mental energy surge. I focused on the massive shipping containers scattered across the dock. Thousands of tons of steel and cargo, littering the entire port, simply evaporated into thin air in an instant. I didn't even bother looking at those insignificant small fry. They were eliminated easily, so I shifted my gaze across the harbor. I set my sights on the command ship of the quotes. That cargo ship in the distance is my real target. I raised my hand, reaching out across the void to seize the ship from a distance. My mental energy enveloped it instantly, locking onto the target 3 miles away. Inside the command center of the Victoria, Davis was losing his mind. The CIA's director of operations for Asia stared at the final images, beaming back from the drone, slamming his fist onto the control console in a rage. On the screen, his target simply raised a hand. And the resources? Everything in the port vanished in an instant. What kind of power is this? Retreat. Immediate retreat. Davis screamed in terror, realizing our intel was dead wrong. This was never a routine mission. His words cut off sharply as he felt the entire world shift beneath him. The massive ship was being hoisted upward by an irresistible, invisible force. Report. We've lost all power. The ship is. We're flying. My God, we're going up. We've completely left the surface of the sea. The panicked screams of the crew turned into a chaotic blur. Davis could only watch in horror as his reality shattered. Davis stumbled toward the porthole and saw a sight he would never forget. Their massive cargo ship, built to carry thousands, and weighing tens of thousands of tons, was being toyed with. I focused my gaze on the vessel. I watched the massive ship, struggling violently as it hung suspended in midair. A cold smirk played at the corner of my mouth. Your ship is quite impressive, I whispered under my breath, my voice low and steady, audible only to me. I think I'll take it. I let my consciousness contract violently. Virum, the 10,000-ton cargo ship, vanished into thin air, leaving behind only 100 CIA agents and Navy SEALs, like souls damned to hell. They let out desperate, piercing screams. A deafening crash echoed across the bay. I didn't spare a single glance for these dogs. As the men hit the water, I simply turned away. The sharks will handle the rest. I had barely taken 2 steps when a violent wave of dizziness washed over me. I wondered if this was my only chance. The moment had finally arrived. I rushed forward to provide support for the police units. I told myself, you are the future of this country. Don't push yourself too hard. I'm fine, it's just a bit of low blood sugar, I said, waving them off. I took a long, deep breath to steady my nerves. A spark, a flicker of fire reignited deep within my chest. I saw the weakness of man reflected in their eyes. I had to survive today so that I could endure the coming horrors of the future apocalypse. I stood tall, ready to purge the area. 7 specific locations marked on my map. I looked into the distance at the nation's most mysterious research site, the Azure Heavens Gate Plan, Space Center, Chapter 10. Beneath the Azure Heavens Gate, a mechanical god awaits. Apocalypse Town, Day 20, Jutsan Aerospace City of Dongfang, deep in the heart of the Gobi Desert. This aerospace hub is one of the greatest achievements on Earth. The Azure Heavens Gate Plan, General Assembly Workshop Number 7. As Li Gaodong stepped off the walkway, he handed me a cryptic document. Make it quick with this. Here is the Azure Heavens Gate Plan, the current list of supplies, including the verification aircraft, the Xuanwu aerospace fighter, and the aerospace carrier. The Kunping space carrier, which hasn't been assembled yet. I took the list, my eyes scanning equipment that, in the apocalypse, would each be worth a small fortune. But my expression remained calm. I nodded my tactical boots, crunching against the gravel, a sound sharper than the cold machinery. The real reason I came here was for one specific person. Let's head over there. I moved quickly through the peripheral equipment maintenance zone. Do you have the brain of a pig? A loud thud followed as blueprints hit the floor. In the maintenance hangar, a middle-aged man's roar echoed. How many times do I have to tell you the pressure for the hydraulic transmission system is 1,200? You changed it to 1,500. Who's responsible if it explodes? You think you're the chief engineer? I stopped, dead in my tracks. Li Gaodong frowned beside me. Li Gaodong was about to signal one of his men to handle the noise. but he stopped when he saw me turn and head straight for the hangar. Inside the hangar, the air was thick with the heavy scent of engine oil and metal shavings. A young man in grease-stained overalls stood with his head bowed and fists clenched. Blueprints were scattered all over the floor at his feet. Standing over him was a middle-aged man with a massive beer belly and a department head badge pinned to his chest. The technical chief was screaming at the top of his lungs. Section chief, if you look at the formulas for fluid mechanics, the young man started. If we don't raise the threshold, the kinetic armor's knee joint will lock during high-speed maneuvers. His voice was quiet but stubborn, even as his frame shook with nerves. Physics doesn't lie. Physics? You, the chief mocked. You're just a contract worker from some bottom-tier technical college. And you're trying to teach me physics? Section Chief Wong's face contorted. Every muscle in his jaw was twitching with pure rage. This is a national aerospace base, not your personal playground. Pack your trash. Don't bother coming in tomorrow. Get out. The young man's head snapped up at the command. His eyes were bloodshot, but he forced himself to stay calm. He gritted his teeth, holding back the urge to lash out. He wouldn't cry. He just knelt down to gather his blueprints from the floor. But a hand reached out faster than his, picking up a stained sheet. My fingers were long and steady as I gripped the paper. I looked at the complex joints drawn on the page. By focusing on the essentials, it was possible to make this design much more efficient. I stepped further into the hangar. What department are you from? Don't you know the rules? Section Chief Wong barked. He was still fuming, looking for a new target to vent his frustration on. He spun around and saw my unfamiliar face. Seeing me holding the blueprints only made his rage boil over even more. But a second later, the look on his face shifted from fury to pure shock. It was like someone had grabbed him by the throat. His voice cut off instantly, because standing right behind me was the head of the Ministry of State Security. Li Gaodong, a man seen constantly on the national news, was following my lead. The powerful official stood there with a cold, professional intensity. He kept a respectful half-step behind me, his expression stern and focused. Who drew this design? I asked, tapping the blueprint. I looked directly at the young man covered in grease. He looked stunned, nodding his head instinctively. I did. Those are my personal calculations. I couldn't believe my luck. A spark lit up in my eyes as I realized who he was. In the future human survivor base, he was known as the Machine God. In my past life, he wasn't discovered until the 5th year of the apocalypse. By then, his entire group had been wiped out. He had even lost his right hand. 3 of his fingers were gone, all because of a senseless accident. I remembered the underground human shelter, the city of Xinhua, facing an assault from millions of monsters. The city walls were finally crumbling. They were out of ammunition and out of food. Just as everyone fell into total despair, a gigantic mecha appeared. It was assembled from scrap metal, built from abandoned mines, tank hulls, and engine parts. A helicopter engine roared as it burst from the ground. It looked like a steel god of war. It carved a bloody path through the zombie nest to save the last survivors. The pilot of that mecha was a legend. The creator, revered by all as the Machine God. But right now, the world is still normal. The future Machine God is crouching on the floor, sobbing like a child. He's crying over a few crucial parameters, but his calculations are perfect. I folded the blueprint and tucked it into my pocket. In the future, this design will be known as the UANUZ-1. Suddenly, Section Chief Wong snapped back to his senses. He looked at the young man with pure contempt. He couldn't help but interfere, shouting, "Comrades, this boy doesn't even know the rules of the trade. This parameter is illegal." I turned my head and looked at him, my expression cold. I stared at him as if I were looking at a dead man, not even bothering to argue. I simply turned to my AI assistant, Ling. "Check Section Chief Wong's permissions," I whispered, and revoked them all. 2 seconds later, my earpiece crackled with the profile of Section Chief Wong, head of technical maintenance for peripheral equipment, security clearance level C. Effective immediately, revoke his clearance to 0, I commanded, pointing at him. This man is guilty of gross negligence. He's compromised a major national research project. Investigate his entire background. Check every cent he's spent, I added. Who do you think you are? Wong's face turned pale instantly as he roared back, trying to look menacing. I have an administrative rank, he screamed. I didn't even give him a second glance as I turned away. With a wave of my hand, 2 Special Forces soldiers, armed to the teeth, stepped forward. They dragged Wong away like a dead dog while he wailed and screamed. But his cries didn't last long. They were muffled before he even cleared the doorway, leaving the hangar in silence. A heavy, suffocating silence. Lu Yuan watched the scene unfold, his jaw dropping. He stood there stunned, his mind going completely blank. That arrogant section chief, Wong, was gone. Just like that. Lu Yuan looked down at his own hands, covered in calluses. They were scarred with small wounds from years of thankless labor. It's okay, Lu Yuan stammered, his voice trembling. Are you ready to follow me? I asked him directly. I looked him in the eye, waiting for his answer. Where are we going? He asked. To save the world. I grabbed Lu Yuan's oil-stained hand and held it firmly. From today on, you don't have to take orders from any of those idiots. I was done letting talent like his waste away under fools. Whatever materials you need, the state will provide them. Whatever you want to build, the state will let you build it. Even if you want to build a mecha, I'll get you the nuclear fusion batteries. Lu Yuan stood frozen, feeling a sudden flame ignite in his chest. The gears of destiny were finally turning for him. In this very moment, his life underwent an extraordinary change. We entered the elevator of the Nantion Assembly Workshop number 7. The rapid descent created a sickening sense of weightlessness. Lu Yuan gripped the handrail tightly as the cabin plummeted. His face turned pale as he realized how deep we were going. We're already more than 500 meters underground, I noted calmly. He looked at me, his eyes wide with shock and curiosity. This was a top-secret nuclear bunker for war and famine, but now, it's ours. I had transformed this place into the incubation nest for the Nantion project. Lu Yuan watched the floor numbers flash by, his voice dropping to a low murmur. This is the first time I've ever seen a world like this, he whispered. I didn't say a word as we reached the bottom level. I simply pulled out a tablet of concentrated glucose. I bit down on it with a sharp crunch. A burst of intense sweetness exploded across my tongue. The sugar hit my system, providing a faint sense of relief. It soothed the throbbing ache deep inside my brain. After 10 straight days of high-intensity isolation, I felt like I'd aged a year. My mental state was stretched to its absolute limit. I was like a violin string tightened until it screeched, ready to snap at any second. In my past life, this was where the final stone of human civilization fell. During the first year of the apocalypse, this very bunker was completely overrun, swarmed by monsters as if they were nothing but common insects. When the army of survivors finally arrived, they found nothing but ruins. The floor was littered with the bodies of countless scientists. All their plans and progress had been wiped out in an instant. Prototypes that were decades ahead of their time were buried forever beneath the yellow sands. It was the most painful loss for the nation's progress. The elevator began to slow down. Slowly, the massive alloy door slid open to either side. A sudden gust of air hit us. It was freezing, smelling of ozone and high-octane fuel. The scent of machinery filled the room. The camera panned across the space. An old man sat there. He was slumped in a wheelchair on the floor, surrounded by monitors and data feeds. This man had dedicated his entire life to his work, and Fordrip was hooked into his withered arm, but his eyes shone with an incredible intensity. I saw Comrade Xiaoshu and the others arrive, just as Chapter 11 began with the old man looking completely exhausted. This was Academician Zagny, the backbone of our defense. I stepped forward and bowed slightly, telling him he should be in a hospital. I can't just stay lying down, the academician replied. Zagny looked at me, his young benefactor, with a hint of skepticism. His hand trembled slightly as he spoke about the end of the world. Everything he built was meant for a museum, but now it could actually serve a purpose. He dismissed the nurse trying to help him and turned his wheelchair around. He faced the massive 20-meter-high doors behind him. Do you know about the Blue Sky Gate project? He asked. I nodded slowly, keeping my hands behind my back. I mentioned the Kunping spaceplane and the Swanu high-mobility fighters, the absolute pinnacle of our tactical engineering. Beside me, Lu Yuan's head snapped up, his eyes wide with shock. Those are just internet myths, right? Are they actually real? Academician Zagny gave a bitter, tired smile. He explained that current energy technology was the main bottleneck. But the people of Dacia have a spirit that never admits defeat. The old man pressed his palm against the scanner, triggering a heavy hydraulic hiss. It sounded like the roar of a giant beast waking from a long slumber. This was the threshold where reality met science fiction. As the light flooded in, our eyes struggled to adjust to the glare. Lu Yuan froze in his tracks, his legs giving out beneath him. He fell straight to his knees, staring at the sight in absolute awe. At that very moment, the president announced the end of the national campaign. But my focus was entirely on what lay hidden deep within this facility. Lu Yuan's mouth hung open, the words dying in his throat at the sight before us. We stood at the edge of a hollowed-out subterranean cavern, bathed in the glare of high-power floodlights. Resting there, supported by a massive steel skeleton, was a titan. The sheer scale of the thing was enough to steal the air from my lungs. It loomed silently in the artificial abyss like a sleeping god. It was impossibly large, its silhouette stretching into the shadows. The design was aggressive, built for total dominance. The total length exceeded 600 meters. Its hull was almost entirely encased in a matte black coating. Where the plating remained open, dense circuits and complex mechanics were exposed to the light. This was a strategic interstellar spacecraft platform, the culmination of our world's power. A project that had drained the nation's resources for 20 long years. The ultimate vessel ever conceived by human hands. Or rather, it was a giant egg that had not yet been allowed to hatch. Lu Yuan scrambled back to his feet, using his hands and knees to steady himself. He looked like he wanted to rush toward it, but his instinct held him back. His entire body trembled as he stared, unable to look away from the beast. That empty space in the center, that's the bay for the dual-target fusion engine. This is where the electromagnetic cannon is supposed to be mounted. The sheer magnetic force required is staggering. My God, this structural design, it's completely useless right now. It was prepared for deep space operations, but this mechanical genius is flawed. It's completely unfinished. Lu Yuan looks like a child right now. Like a kid who spent his life building Legos, only to see a real starship parked in his driveway. It's a tragedy that this masterpiece is stuck on the ground. I can't let this academic's life work go to waste. We stared at the incomplete skeleton, his eyes welling with tears. It was a swan song of death for our era. The legacy of our generation was failing because the technology wasn't there. The engine breakthroughs never happened, and the energy transmission loss was too high. It was a dead object, nothing but a skeleton of the XUANV high-mobility fighter. They hadn't even performed a live-fire test yet. Originally, this project was meant to be abandoned. It was supposed to be sealed away, waiting for a technological breakthrough. Maybe in 50 years, but we don't have 50 years to wait. I walked right up to the edge of the observation deck. I gripped the cold railing, my eyes locked onto the skeletal frame of the Alpha. In my previous lives, during the final days of the collapse, the apocalypse was absolute. Mutant flying zombies ruled the air. Swarms of zombie birds blotted out the sun and choked the engines of our fighter jets. Giant zombies could rip the turrets off tanks, stripping us of our ground superiority. Without air cover, humanity was forced to hide underground like rats. If I want to secure this government contract, I have to make a move. I need to take back control of the battlefield. I need to reclaim the sky and ground the birds of prey. This is the only way. I have to take this relic and prove its worth, so we can live peacefully on this planet once again. If I call myself a man, I have to give them a future. Zhang Yuanxi froze, his breathing growing heavy and ragged. His heart rate spiked as he stammered. You mean? In 1 month, the world's rules will reset, and the impossible tech bottlenecks of the past will vanish. The limits of gene technology will be shattered. Even if progress stalled, the data recording never stopped. With this genius on my side, I realized that true science is a league of its own. I have the confidence to make it fly, but first, I have to take it all with me. Zhang Yuanxi's voice trembled as he questioned both the science and the stakes. Even if it seems impossible, I have to take them. I emptied the rest of the glucose tube directly into my mouth. I stripped away the bolts. It was time to reveal these secrets. That's when I noticed how terrible I looked. My face was deathly pale. He took a step forward, trying to advise me. This thing is more complex than a nuclear power plant, and its structure is massive. Why not just sell it? I didn't have a single day to waste on rest, so I marched toward the massive landing gear. I snapped back to reality in that moment, staring at the bird's frame and my own reflection. Looking at this almost magical creation, it was the first time I had seen anything like it. I took a deep breath and muttered, This is what I have to fix. I climbed over the railing and jumped straight down into the landing zone. I made my way toward the top of the platform. With every step I took toward that monster, my heart beat faster. This thing concentrates too much hard work and too much precision in its design. The sheer amount of information it holds is too much to process. I stood there, dwarfed under the giant shadow of the LE project. Compared to this steel giant, I felt as tiny as a speck of dust. The moment my palm touched the terahertz gold skeleton, my brain felt like it was hit. It was like a violent strike from a heavy sledgehammer. Target locked, Bird Egg aircraft carrier. Status, unfinished form. Dimensions, 47 centimeters of solid mass. Weight, 7,000 tons of structural complexity. Warning, target volume is excessive. Mental strain reaching critical levels. The threshold was about to be crossed, and my vision instantly turned blood red. A high-pitched screech filled my ears, like nails clawing against a chalkboard. This wasn't just about weight. It was the crystallization of generations of scientific wisdom, the result of countless days and nights spent in the rain. Built on nothing but pure sweat and sacrifice, 2 streaks of neon-bright blood suddenly sprayed from my nostrils, staining my collar deep red as Zhang Yuanxi rushed toward me in a panic. It was all for December. Don't come any closer, I roared, my voice sounding terrifyingly hoarse as I gritted my teeth. Blood seeped from my gums, making the metallic taste in my mouth even stronger. With bloodstained teeth, I screamed internally, I cannot back down now. If I retreat, humanity will lose its only chance to defend itself. We'll be forced to wallow in the mud, losing the sky forever. Move. My eyes snapped wide open as my mental strength surged like a tidal wave. I poured everything I had into it, letting the energy wrap around the target. I forced my will upon this massive, mechanical monster. Space itself began to warp and twist under the sheer pressure. Academician Zhang watched, his face frozen in absolute shock. The Igadon and the Uluyuan, that entire mechanical spacecraft. The Kuanping, stretching 600 meters long. It stood majestic as a mountain, surrounded by floating fighters and production lines. Suddenly, the entire view began to flicker and turn illusory. It shrank down to a single black dot, then vanished into nothingness. Amen. A sound seemed to echo from the depths of my soul as the entire underground base shuddered. The massive pressure difference instantly triggered a violent storm. Dust and debris kicked up from the floor, swirling violently through the air. It was everywhere. The underground abyss had always been one of the greatest challenges of my life. It was once crowded, but now it felt so empty it was haunting. Only a few isolated supports remained, looking utterly desolate. Thud! My strength finally gave out, and my entire body began to collapse. I fell backward, my vision blurring. Igadon rushed toward me like a cheetah. He caught me just in time, before I could hit the hard ground. Blood was leaking from my eyes, nose, and mouth, covering my face. My skin was as pale as a sheet of paper. I looked like someone who had just managed to crawl out from under a mountain of corpses. How are you? Are you okay? A doctor. Quick, call a doctor. Igadon screamed. His voice was cracked and his eyes were bloodshot with panic. I reached up with a trembling hand. I tried to carelessly wipe the blood from my face. I struggled just to open my mouth and speak. I'm fine, just a little weak. I looked over at Zhang Yuanqi. His face was a roadmap of deep lines, etched by the passage of time and old age. The old man stared at the empty base, the fruit of all his efforts now gone. It was the culmination of a lifetime of labor. It was like watching his own soul, and all his deepest desires, finally take shape. When that day comes, I will let it soar. It will be suspended against the starry sky. A giant mutation engine, equipped with a particle cannon, flying above the 9 heavens to become everyone's Noah's Ark. As those words left my lips, my head slumped forward. I lost consciousness completely, and a deathly silence fell over the room. Only the medical monitors remained, emitting rapid, piercing alarms. Zhang Yuanqi stood up, his entire body trembling with emotion. He ignored the medical staff, trying to hold him back. He bowed deeply toward me, honoring the man who had given everything. I beg of you. The credit belongs not to a god, but to the man who carries the world on his shoulders. Chapter 12. The Heart's Embrace. A miracle descends. Apocalypse countdown. Day 10. I have no idea how much time had passed. I woke up suddenly, my body jolted by violent shaking. I felt like I'd been torn limb from limb and stitched back together. He's awake. Director, he's finally awake. A joyful cry rang in my ears. I forced my eyes open and saw a blur of excitement. I was inside one of the 3 medical pods, surrounded by monitors and humming equipment. And 4 was stuck into the back of my hand, and Li Guodong's bearded face leaned over me. His eyes were even more bloodshot than mine as he let out a long, shaky breath. Kid, you gave me the fright of my life. You've been out for 24 hours. He handed me a thermos, his hand still trembling slightly. If your brain activity hadn't stayed stable, I would have started planning your funeral. I tried to sit up, but my body felt completely hollowed out. Don't move, Li Guodong barked, his voice stern but relieved. He gently pushed me back down against the pillows. I sank back, feeling the weight of my own exhaustion. The doctor said you have severe mental overload. You need to rest, even if just for a few minutes. I opened my mouth to speak, but my voice was raspy, like I'd swallowed a handful of sand. Li Guodong spoke in a heavy, serious tone. It's June 27th. There are only 18 days left until the date you mentioned. 18 days. The countdown was relentless. I closed my eyes and reached out with my consciousness. I could feel that massive ovary of energy pulsing within me. It floated quietly in the void, surrounded by a sea of power. Resources. Piles of them, like mountains. This time, my life wouldn't be in vain. The wounded have been moved, and the core team has retreated to the Ark base in the northwest. Li Guodong's expression was complicated as he mentioned the boy with no name. That kid from Wuhan. He stubbornly refused to leave. He insisted on following you. Said he wanted to see you unleash that big thing of yours. I let out a weak, dry laugh and told him, let him follow. That thing is his future wife, after all. I forced myself upright, leaning painfully against the back of the seat. I looked out through the porthole at the helicopter blades slicing through the air. We were tearing through the freezing winds of the Kunlun Mountains. This was the heart of it all, the center of everything. Outside the glass lay the ancestor of China's dragon veins, the origin of all mountains. Down below, on what used to be a barren desert, a miracle of history was unfolding. A masterpiece of engineering was coming to life right before my eyes. Tens of thousands of workers were swarming the site like a massive hive. Thousands of excavators and bulldozers crawled through the winding mountains like tireless ants. They were grinding away, reshaping the very earth. The choking dust that usually blankets such sites was nowhere to be seen. Massive wind-breaking nets forced the swirling grit to settle against the ground. The sheer scale of the containment was breathtaking. Colossal floodlights pierced through the dark, stabbing at the night sky. Li Guodong leaned forward, his voice steady and confident. He pointed a finger toward a massive silhouette in the distance. A gargantuan fissure had been carved into the mountain, jagged like a lightning bolt. He couldn't hide the pride in his voice as he spoke about the progress. Phase 1 of Project Chang'e had begun, and the Giants' troops were moving in. They're working 24 hours a day, literally hollowing out the entire mountain. In terms of structural integrity and defense, even if a hydrogen bomb with a yield of 10 million tons of TNT detonated directly on the surface of the planet, the people inside would still be sitting there, calmly playing cards. In my previous life, this was one of the last bastions where survivors held out the longest. It was a tragedy that, back then, everything was so different. There were simply no resources left to sustain us. The entire place had been stripped bare. It was nothing more than a hollow shell of a fortress. But now, it felt solid, reinforced by my intervention. As the helicopter began its descent, the cliffside suddenly groaned and shifted. The rock split wide open, revealing a massive new entrance. The opening was vast, easily large enough to serve as a high-altitude runway. It was wide enough for 2 Boeing 747s to fly through side by side without clipping a wing. We crossed the threshold, and the world transformed instantly. The darkness vanished, replaced by a sudden, blinding clarity. I was looking at an immense, cavernous space carved into the mountain. It was comparable to a full-scale underground city. Endless rows of high-flux mining lamps lined the ceiling. They flooded the interior with a light so bright it felt like high noon, but the problem was obvious. It was empty, far too empty. Aside from the basic ventilation shafts running along the walls, there was nothing but raw concrete still under construction. This super bunker is large enough to house 1,000,000 people, but right now, it looks like a raw, unrenovated shell of a building. 600 meters underground, the air is thin and smells of wet cement and gunpowder. I stood before a massive subterranean cavern over 3.5 meters high. The floor space alone was vast enough to contain half a lifetime of supplies. This was a top-secret, high-fortified shelter. It was perfect. Was this the magical handiwork of nature over hundreds of millions of years, or the result of humanity's frantic expansion through explosives? Aside from the freshly poured concrete, it was so quiet it felt unsettling. A burly man in a camouflage vest spotted us and shouted, "Lao Li, you brought them." I listened as he approached. This was Zhao Jianjin, the commander-in-chief of the entire project. With 2 bars and 4 stars on his shoulders, he looked stressed enough to have mouth ulcers. "Lao Li, I'm so glad you finally got these people here," he barked. Old General Zhao Jianjin was the man in charge of the Tao Yuan base. He was famous for his explosive temper, and honestly, I could see why. You can't make an omelet without breaking eggs, but look at the stakes here. The place is empty, no production lines, no machinery, and no raw materials. And we only have 18 days left before the red mist arrives. "Do you expect my soldiers to fight the mist with shovels?" he roared. Lao Li pointed toward me and said, "I brought the people you need." Zhao Jianjin froze for a moment, staring at me with pure confusion. He looked at my pale face and his eyebrows knitted together instantly. I understood why the general was so angry. By any conventional logic, what we were trying to do was insane. It was an impossible task to finish in time. Suddenly, Su Yan stepped forward to face the veteran commander. I stayed quiet and watched her move with total confidence. "If you had all the equipment ready, you'd be the best in the world," she said. She scanned the massive, empty cavern and asked, "How long to get the power running?" The shyness I usually saw in her eyes had completely vanished. It was replaced by something else. A cold, technical fervor that only a true genius possesses. Her mind was racing as her fingers traced invisible blueprints in the air. "If we use the Dragon's Nest configuration, we won't have any issues. We can set up the production lines exactly like that. With the nuclear reactor in place, I just need precise positioning to link them. I can have the entire line operational in no time." Zhao Jianjin stomped his feet in a rage, convinced she was just bragging. "The equipment? It's going to fall right from the sky." Su Yan smiled, unscrewed her flask, and took a sip of goji water. I cleared my dry throat and prepared to speak. My voice wasn't loud, but it echoed through the empty cavern. I looked at the vast space before me and made my demands. "Just give me enough room," I said. "And one more thing. Get the Core City team ready immediately. There's about to be a bit of a tremor." Zhao Jianjin opened his mouth to argue again, but Lao Li grabbed him and hissed, "Old Zhao, shut up and listen to him." Lao Li's gaze was dead serious as he barked, "Execute the orders." 10 minutes later, the central zone was completely cleared out. I stood there alone with Su Yan. The sheer scale of this underground chamber was overwhelming. Across the desert-like concrete floor, the massive spotlights flickered. Every single beam concentrated on me as I narrowed my eyes. The rest of the crew stood high up on the observation platform. They watched from a distance, waiting for a miracle. I took a deep breath and raised my arm for a split second. In that silent space, the power of my inventory began to stir. Over the last 2 weeks, I've scoured half of the corporate market. Plundering goods in the shadows was my specialty. "Come out," I muttered, snapping my eyes open. I slammed my palm flat against the cold earth. There was no warning, none at all. The very laws of physics and life itself seemed to compress violently in that single moment. A deafening roar erupted, shaking the cavern to its core. A shockwave, visible to the naked eye, exploded outward. It swept across the floor like a physical wall of force. The entire blast was centered right on me. The observers scrambled back, shielding themselves from the pressure. They couldn't even keep their eyes open for what came next. In that second, Zhao Jianjin felt his materialistic worldview shatter into a million pieces. The vast, empty expanse of Zone A, which had been nothing but a hollow void, was instantly filled by a mile-long dragon of cold steel. The Selene Dragon's Nest had arrived. The entire zone was now locked in position. On Amphi 1, I swept my hand toward the left, like a single, giant stroke of a paintbrush. A kilometer-long assembly line manifested out of thin air. 20 massive production lines stretched into the distance. Hundreds of precision robotic arms gleamed in the light. Unassembled fighter jet components filled the space instantly. Next, I filled the void in Zone B, the lightning depot. To the right, countless missile racks appeared in massive stacks. Like falling dominoes, they materialized from nothing. They flooded the entire arsenal zone in a heartbeat. Zhao Jianjin gripped the railing with white knuckles. His eyes looked like they were about to pop out of his skull. Was this quantum transfer or some kind of grand transformation? Li Gaodong took a deep, shaky breath. Even having seen it before, this scale gave him goosebumps. Then came Zone C, the energy sector. The ground groaned and sank under the sudden pressure. Tens of thousands of tons forced a scream from the earth. It was the reactor core from the East Sea nuclear power plant. I ripped it out by the roots. Thick layers of complex piping and the massive cooling system appeared like magic. The entire structure slammed perfectly onto the foundations, still in its containment state. That heavy, industrial weight made every nuclear expert in the room tremble with excitement. Finally, I looked up. I stared at the massive opening above, reserved for the primary sector. 100-meter-deep abyss waiting for the ultra-giant equipment. My face grew paler as warm blood leaked from my nostrils, but my smile only grew wilder. I was reaching my limit, and Li Gaodong watched me stumble with terror in his eyes. He was sweating through his clothes, his anxiety peaking. He looked like he wanted to rush over and catch me. I stood in the center of the field, blood gushing from my nose once again. But I couldn't stop now. I didn't even bother to wipe the blood away. I had to break through. I had to see this through to the very end. I looked toward the ceiling and violently threw my hands upward. In that instant, the air was sucked out of the room and the lights in the base died. It felt as if everything was being devoured. A massive, suffocating shadow descended upon us. Appearing out of thin air, the lighting system flickered back to life. Underneath this 300-meter-high underground sky, it appeared. It was the Kuan Peng, the massive hull of the ship. 600 meters of metallic shadow loomed over us. It hung silently for a split second before slamming down with a roar, its landing gear deploying. It crushed the reinforced floor, the deafening metallic impact cracking the very foundation. In that moment, the entire base felt like it was caught in a violent embrace. The dust finally began to settle, revealing the transformed cavern. The cold, black underground void was now filled with steel and humming machinery. The nuclear reactors emitted a soft blue glow as the indicator lights blinked to life. The production line began to click and were into motion. And there stood the spacecraft. Like an ancient beast, it rose proudly in the center of the facility. It looked down on the humans below, making us look like mere ants. This was the pinnacle of engineering. An industrial miracle, as massive as Noah's Ark at the end of the world. Suddenly, every ounce of strength was sucked out of my body. My legs gave out. I collapsed backward onto the cold floor. I wiped the blood from my nose and flashed a weak, arrogant smile, thinking, still alive. A smile spread across my face as I looked up and thought, I'm finally here. Everyone stood there, paralyzed, just staring at the sight. Commander Jiao and his team had been frozen in place for a long time. Commander Jiao, the equipment is all here, I said. I pointed toward the national treasures filling the pit and told him the rest of the infrastructure was his job. Then I looked at Lu Yuan and pointed toward the Kuan Peng. Lu Yuan, there's your big toy. I brought it back for you. Now, it's your turn. The lead engineer of the UND began to move. She descended the steps, her entire body trembling with emotion. She looked like a pilgrim embarking on a sacred journey. She walked toward the massive warship and reached out a shaking hand. As she touched the cold landing gear, tears began to flow silently down her face. But the sadness didn't last long. Her eyes shifted, filling with a kind of manic, fighting spirit. Every single part is here. It's a work of art, a masterpiece, she whispered. Lu Yuan spun around suddenly, her eyes bloodshot and wild. She screamed at me, give me the power source. Give me the entire production chain. As long as I have enough raw matter, we won't need anything else. I can build anything with these materials. I wanted to give her exactly what she needed to make it fly. I'll install a nuclear fusion engine, she declared. I want it. She was ready to transform this relic into a machine, the most terrifying war machine the world had ever seen. I watched her, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. In that very moment, everything changed. The future god of mechanics was finally coming into her own. A dormant power was gradually waking up. Deep within the heart of my massive project, the gears began to turn. Doomsday Countdown, Day 17. Across the face of the Earth, 12 supersecurity zones were already under construction. If the previous resource transfers were like moving mountains, this was like reshaping the heavens. The state machinery was finally running at full power. The sheer force being unleashed was enough to fuel the entire project. In just 15 days, the activity on this ancient land reached a fever pitch. The most significant construction in human history was underway. These 12 underground supercities, nicknamed the Peach Blossom Spring, grew at a speed that defied logic. Everything was ready, except for the battle itself. Base number 1 at Mount Carlin, deep in the mountains. Taiyang, Sham, and the rest followed suit. 11 other bases, along with 108 medium-sized shelters and over 2,000 smaller bunkers, were all under construction at once. Simultaneous production, 35 million workers, and 100,000 heavy machines. They worked 24 hours a day without a single break. The light from these 12 sites burned brighter in the night sky than the Milky Way itself, as the roar of concrete mixers filled the air. It felt as if the very pulse of the earth was beating violently. I sat in the Supreme Command briefing room. Even when I was out in the field, my holographic image stayed connected. Progress report, I commanded. Reporting, sir. The Minister of Industry and Information Technology stood up. His voice was raspy but filled with excitement as he looked at me. As of this morning, 65% of the first phase of Project Peach Blossom is complete. Internal air and water circulation systems are being debugged as we speak. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs then reported that the repatriation order had been issued worldwide. Every citizen of Dacia abroad was being called home. The General Administration of Customs reported that all personnel have returned home. They confirmed that all goods imported from abroad, with the exception of a few basic commodities, are practically all in place and secured. The Ministry of Health then took the floor. They reported that essential medical equipment and expert teams from Level 3 hospitals across the entire country have been mobilized. They were secretly stationed at the various bases by water while medicine reserves are being built. The Ministry of Agriculture reported that the strategic reserves of grain and seeds from across the nation are fully gathered. The transfer to the underground cities is underway, ensuring we have a backup. Even if the surface is completely lost to us, our reserves will be enough to sustain 1 billion people. We can maintain a minimum survival level for 3 years. This wasn't just a report, it was a military order heavy with responsibility. A miracle built from the sweat of millions and cold steel. I listened in silence, gripping a vial of a powerful recovery agent in my hand. It was a formula that hadn't even been commercialized in this era yet. My face was still pale, but my gaze remained as sharp as a knife. It's not enough, even if all of this feels sudden. I interrupted the meeting, shattering the slightly optimistic atmosphere in the room. Every eye turned to me as I spoke. Survival isn't enough. I let out a cold laugh and addressed them. Ladies and gentlemen, we have to face the truth. This isn't just some snowstorm. It's not a simple earthquake. It is eternal darkness. Do you understand? This is the tide of mutant evolution. What we need isn't just to exist, but the continuation of our civilization. What we need is a counterattack. I stood up, my silhouette looking thin in the holographic projection, but my aura was steady. The National Bank of Genes, the entire biodiversity repository. It all must be taken. The Palace Museum, the National Galleries, everything. That is the very soul of our nation. Every physical book from the great libraries must be moved. Every server cluster from the data centers must follow. This is the spark of life itself. Every trace of human achievement must be preserved. I, Saran, waved my hand dismissively at their hesitation. I would rather take too much than leave our history to rot. We are leaving nothing behind. Since we are moving everything. Move it all, and leave nothing but the bare earth behind. The meeting room fell silent. A brief, deathly silence hung in the air. Then, the old man in the head seat gave a heavy nod. His eyes were sharp as he looked at me. Comrade Saran is right, he declared. As long as the Green Mountains remain, we can rebuild. We don't fear a lack of fuel, but we must secure the wood now. Even if the surface is destroyed, as long as our soul survives, we can reclaim the earth. Rebuild China. Pass down my orders immediately. The command was executed. Day 14, the National Bank of Genes. The National Museum. The countdown for the National Museum began. Day 16, Dapeng Peninsula, Shenzhen. I arrived at the National Bank of Genes. It was a massive, sprawling complex. The entire facility was built directly into the mountainside. The storage terraces held tens of millions of tons of material. Every single biological sample of our world was stored right here. The Great Gene Bank. Everything here is integrated into the world's biological history. This place was a crucial element of my plan back in my previous life. Back then, this whole region was a disaster zone. Mutations turned it into a forbidden wasteland for humanity. A mega tsunami eventually wiped out everything that was left. Countless precious plant resources and stem cell samples were lost. Biological data, all of it sank to the bottom of the sea. Later, to find even a single grain of uncontaminated wheat, humanity had to pay the price of dozens of lives. In this life, I absolutely will not let that tragedy happen again. I watched as the commander of the 5th Regiment cleared the area. He looked at me with pure reverence, as if I were a god in the army. Thank you for your hard work, I said, nodding as I stepped inside. The air was freezing and thick with high-tech machinery. Massive liquid nitrogen storage tanks were lined up in rows. They looked like silent tombstones or cradles for the future. There is a peak of potential hidden inside these walls. It's too risky, Li Gaodong said with a frown. He was visibly worried about the cryogenic nitrogen refrigerators. One wrong vibration from a precision sequencer could ruin everything. He asked if my method of moving things was safe enough. Moving a nuclear power plant or a production line is just moving heavy iron. But this gene bank is as fragile as a basket of eggs. I stopped and gently pressed my palm against a liquid nitrogen tank. It was labeled Chinese rice planting resources. I looked at him, my eyes gleaming with confidence. Inside my space, everything is frozen, I said. It is absolute stillness. Nothing moves, nothing changes. Whatever goes in comes out exactly the same. Li Gaodong stood there, completely stunned. He stared at me as the weight of my words sank in. I could see his pupils contract as his scalp went numb with shock. Absolute stillness meant this wasn't just a warehouse. It was a sanctuary where time itself had no power. I flashed a grin, showing my teeth. In here, not even an electron will move, I told him. The laws of physics inside my mind are mine to command. I focused my mental strength and began the transfer. My mental energy surged outward again like a rising tide. Right now, I felt more focused than ever before. I was more capable, more composed, even with the throbbing pain in my skull. I had learned to live with that agony. In fact, I welcomed it. Every time I secured a piece of my country's foundation, I felt a rush of pride. The massive gene bank was finally in my grasp. Layer by layer, the seed bank holding millions of samples began to vanish. The entire vault of life, containing every vital specimen, was being moved. I took the human genetic resources next, then the cell bank, storing stem cells from rare birds, and the DNA of nearly extinct animals. It was 2 a.m. in the capital. This ancient, sleeping city was still, bathed in light, but the forbidden city, usually swarming with tourists, was now being guarded by officers maintaining a strict perimeter. The entire area was locked down tight. A man stepped out of a car. It was Minister Jiang. He pulled his heavy military coat tight against the cold. Under the glare of the spotlights, his face looked pale. After 2 weeks of high-intensity overexertion, my mental strength was on the verge of total collapse, held together only by sheer willpower. I refused to lose this fight against destiny. Su ran. Do we really have to take everything? An old man in a Zhongshan suit, his hair white as snow, stepped forward. It was the director of the National Museum. He had spent his entire life guarding these red walls and yellow tiles. His eyes were bloodshot in that moment, looking as if he were sending his own child away, marching them straight to the firing squad. I looked at him, my vision blurring for a second. My voice was raspy, but I stood as straight as a tensed wire. If we leave even a single brick on this ground, in 30 days, it will be corroded into mud by acid rain or trampled into powder by mutant beasts. I lifted my head. My gaze swept across the towering structure of the Hall of Supreme Harmony. The carved animals on the eaves stood silent and watchful. Everything was still in the dead of night. Only by saving these relics from the coming trials would people realize the truth. The director looked at me, his composure finally breaking. His hands trembled as he took off his glasses. He wiped away his tears and finally turned to the side. He gave me a deep, respectful bow. He was entrusting me with everything. Please, he whispered, save it all. What he was handing over was 5,000 years of Chinese history. I didn't waste another second. I marched toward the Hall of Supreme Harmony, with Li Gaodong following close behind. Li used to think I was just someone who mastered supernatural powers. But now, looking at my exhausted silhouette, he saw a man possessed by a desperate, solitary bravery. I was ready to face 10,000 enemies just to carry the soul of China on my shoulders. I stood in the center of the main hall, facing the golden dragon throne. The ultimate symbol of imperial power was barely 3 meters in front of me. In my previous life, this throne and the entire hall had been shredded into splinters by the talons of a mutant giant eagle. It was time. In my past life, that moment was a pure humiliation for humanity. I reached out my hand, palm aimed directly at the dragon throne. There was no shattering crash, only a slight distortion in the air. Space itself warped, and the throne vanished into my storage. Next came the massive golden pillars wrapped in red, the twin dragon statues, the cloisonné incense burners, and even the floor tiles. I moved like a tireless vacuum, my consciousness expanding outward. My mental reach pierced through the walls, covering the entire inner city. I locked onto my next target, the underground protection zone and the treasure pavilion. Along the river during the Qingming festival scroll and the 1,000 li of rivers and mountains. Retrieved. Target locked. The rest of the treasure pavilion. The Qing Dynasty Gold Cup and the 3-part seal of the Heavenly King. Retrieved. Target locked. The Clock Pavilion. Recovery complete. Next, the exhibition halls. Then the warehouses. These national treasures were too vital to be left to fate. I wouldn't let them be worshipped as mere curiosities. Inside the British Museum, like some stolen relics. Names flashed rapidly through my recovery list as 10 minutes ticked by. In just 10 minutes, the world's largest palace complex became a literal ghost town, stripped of everything but its shell. Not even a single bamboo shoot was left behind. But as I stood in the Hall of Supreme Harmony, 2 thin lines of red began to blur my vision. Blood was visible in the reflection of the empty space. It trickled from my nostrils, a shocking sight for the medical team. The military doctors rushed forward to examine me. Don't touch me, I growled, pushing them back. I ripped off the oxygen mask and wiped my face with my sleeve. The blood smeared across my pale skin, making me look hideous and wild. Next stop, the National Library, 3:30 a.m., South Zhongwankan Avenue. If the Forbidden City was a steep climb for my mind, then the National Library was an entirely different beast. A library isn't just a building, it's a mountain of accumulated history. This place was the largest knowledge base in Asia, now as silent as a tomb. But there was a debate regarding its true value. The truth is, this place is a living seed, far more precious than cold reinforced concrete. Every page here is proof that human civilization actually existed. Millions of paper books were waiting for me inside. 31,190,000 volumes. That included 2 million rare ancient editions and 35,000 oracle bone fragments. The curator accompanying me listed them like family treasures, his voice choking up. He told me that even under strong light, these ancient pages could crack with a single sound. They were sensitive to every temperature shift, but I told him about my space. Inside my dimension, time stands completely still. I saw a fanatical glint flash in the old man's eyes. Whatever you put in there, I promised him, will come out exactly the same. Even if 10,000 years pass by, the paper will still carry the fresh scent of ink. For a book lover, is there any promise more seductive than that? It was a promise of eternity, provided I could move at all. The curator suddenly snapped into action, his resolve hardened. He turned around and faced the staff waiting for his command. Open every single warehouse door, he barked at his administrators. Clear out the underground vaults, and don't leave a single specimen behind. Not even a photocopy. I stepped into the center of the massive atrium. I felt my mental energy beginning to flood the entire hall. My spiritual strength expanded, reaching into every dark corner. It spread out like invisible tentacles, moving in rhythmic waves. At that exact moment, the millions of volumes began to converge into my mind. I felt my power touching countless living souls through these pages, from ancient bamboo slips to delicate scrolls, from silk rolls and vertical volumes to modern journals. Without this knowledge, humanity cannot truly survive. If we lost the wisdom of the Renaissance and our history, mankind wouldn't just lose its life in the coming collapse. It would lose its very memory. One generation would die out, and the next would regress into nothing. They would become savages living in filth because they forgot how to work, how to build, or how to produce. How could they even hope to till the earth? They wouldn't even be able to understand their own writing. I let out a soft, sharp grunt of pain. My temples throbbed as if my brain were being stirred by a needle made of red-hot steel. If anyone could have looked through the walls of the museum, they would have witnessed a scene worthy of being etched into history forever. Tens of millions of books vanished as I collected them all. They disappeared from thousands of shelves in a single heartbeat. In an instant, the Temple of Knowledge, once packed to the brim, suddenly became nothing but an echo. I leaned on Li Guodong for support. He caught me quickly and asked, "Can you still hold on?" as his voice drifted away. He felt like he wasn't supporting a person anymore, but holding a piece of white-hot, searing iron. There was still one last place left. I grit my teeth, my mouth filling with the taste of blood. It didn't matter. Even if my brain explodes, I have to finish this. I told him, Go to the data center in the New Nova building. The Guy in New Area. Chapter 15. The White House trembles. The countdown. Day 15 of the end of the world. Coordinates. Deep mountains of Guizhou, Guy in New Area. 5 a.m. Dawn breaks on the horizon as a special plane lands in the new zone. The Guy in area is surrounded by mountains, the heart of the world's largest data hub. Tensei. Bedouin. Almost every central data center for the internet giants is rooted right here. It doesn't just store the social records and payment info of 1.4 billion people. It holds every industrial blueprint and technical specification we have. It holds our most critical scientific research and the DIA algorithm models. This digital fortress is massive, and it's still running at full throttle. The engineer beside me stares at the endless server rooms, his heart racing. If the power cuts, the cooling system dies with it. Without cooling, these servers will overheat and melt into scrap in 10 minutes. I stand at the peak, overlooking this mountain of data glowing with blue light. My vision is blurring and my mind is screaming like a siren, but I just laugh. Inside my space, there is no need for heat dissipation. My voice is hoarse and ragged, but I speak with absolute confidence. Physics as we know it doesn't exist in that void. Everything is perfectly still, the power won't cut, and the heat won't rise. Even the flow of electrons remains frozen in time. Nothing changes, nothing decays. When I pull this data out again in the future, it will be exactly as it is now. Open the doors, I command. The heavy, airtight security doors groan open, releasing a wave of heat. I take a deep, burning breath. The air is dry, scorching, and thick with the scent of ozone. Strangely, it makes me feel completely at ease. It reminds me of my past life, the exact moment the global network collapsed. Humanity had truly fallen back into the Stone Age. No navigation, no communication, nothing. Without access to information, survivors with full industrial equipment were left helpless. They couldn't even find a simple recipe for making steel. I won't let that absurdity happen again. I reach out my hands toward the machines. It's as if I'm trying to embrace this vast ocean of blue data. I'm not just taking supplies this time. I'm taking something far more vital. This is the source code for the very soul of this country. This isn't some gradual transfer of energy. It isn't an explosion. It's a total, systematic pillaging of reality. My power projects a terrifying display of dominance onto the world. Everything happens simultaneously. My physical form is transformed in an instant. I am a man covered in blood, but in my mind, I see the massive scale of it all. Miles of fiber optic cables and precision temperature control centers. It's as if they are being moved by the hand of a god. They are brutally ripped away from the physical world. The valley, once brilliantly illuminated, plunges instantly into a deathly, suffocating darkness. This isn't just a power outage. The entire foundation of the system is gone. The data center has vanished. Only a few massive, hollow craters remain, exposing the yellowish-brown rock. For a moment, the entire building's network suffers a brief lag. The users try to regain control immediately, but it's no use. A hollow, empty sensation begins to spread. It crawls through every corner of the network cables. I feel like a common man standing on a sheet of solid ice. And then, I lose consciousness completely. In the final second before I black out, my lips still wear that same smile. Satisfied and absolutely manic. It's done. Voices around me start screaming in a panic. Quick, inject intravenous glucose. Prepare a dose of audio tonic. Hurry, they yell as 10 minutes pass by in a blur. Meanwhile, 1,000 meters up, an SJOI optical reconnaissance satellite, belonging to the NRO, the National Reconnaissance Office of the United States, is passing directly overhead. The satellite focuses its lens on the Gignalnia district. An intelligence analyst, stationed at the headquarters in Virginia, is on the graveyard shift. His job is to monitor the building zone. He takes a sip of hot coffee and casts a nonchalant glance at the screen, but in the very next second, he spits out a mouthful of scalding coffee. It splashes across the entire monitor as Tom's eyes bulge in shock. He stares intently at the latest satellite feed. His fingers tap frantically on the keyboard to zoom and enhance. He zooms in again and gasps, "My God." With trembling hands, he grabs the red alert phone. His voice is hoarse, choked with pure terror. "Sir, a catastrophe has occurred. The Great Palace is empty. The National Library is empty, and now even their largest data center base has vanished without a trace. Not destroyed, just gone. It's as if God wiped it away with an eraser. Damn it, what on earth are they doing? Are they trying to flee the Earth? This intel is critical. The top secret file flashes through fiber optic cables to the White House in 10 seconds. The Great Palace's actions aren't just causing a massive population shift. They are fueling confusion and anxiety across the entire nation. The global community is in a total frenzy. Western media headlines shift from "the Great Palace prepares for war" to something else. The palace has become a ghost town. The Times front page calls it an ancient nation's end. This Eastern giant is undergoing a methodical self-destruction. The New York Times reports the Great Palace is empty. They even took the floor tiles. Are they really abandoning the planet? Conspiracy theories are everywhere. Some claim the Great Palace has discovered a prehistoric civilization. Others say they are hiding massive underground weapon systems. Some even whisper that the Great Palace has been controlled by aliens all along. Meanwhile, across the ocean at the White House, the atmosphere in the Oval Office is as suffocating as a frozen sea. A storm is brewing. Standing before the desk are the Secretary of Defense and the CIA Director. The Joint Chiefs of Staff stand there with stone-cold faces, clutching the documents. It's the latest satellite intelligence report. Who can give me a real explanation? The President demands. I need a scientific answer now, even the slightest one. The President violently threw a memo down. It hit the floor as he slammed both hands onto his desk. Tomorrow, a month, one single month. The whole country is paralyzed, factories stopped, schools closed, ports are blocked, and tens of thousands of heavy machines are vanishing. They're heading into the mountains, but the most absurd part is our spy satellites. Their entire data center base. It just vanished from the map. Like magic, leaving nothing behind. Is this even science? Is this a David Copperfield magic show? The CIA director muttered. He wiped the cold sweat from his forehead. His voice was trembling. "Mr. President, we can't explain it. We only know the Great Palace." He opened a file and pulled out a document. It was an electronic map covered in glowing red dots. The President stared at the heat source analysis. They are conducting massive underground works, and the excavation volume is expanding. An operation this size could build nuclear shelters for the entire American population. And on top of that, they are frantically hoarding food, rare metals, and every resource they can find. Medical equipment on the global market is being targeted too. Everything is being swept up by their massive orders. No matter the price. The President slumped back into his chair. A flash of pure terror crossed his eyes, not the fear of a political rival, but a dread of the unknown. Are they about to trigger a war? When a massive neighbor suddenly starts digging frantically, stockpiling supplies in bulk, and hiding everything away. When they bury their heavy industry deep in the mountains, there is only one conclusion. It's the same reaction any normal person would have. They are preparing for war. There is only one possible explanation. The Minister of Defense looked grim. It's like they are building an apocalyptic defense system. He thinks World War III is a challenge to society, and that it's imminent, or else they know something that we don't. After those words, the temperature in the entire office seemed to plummet instantly. Everyone felt a sharp chill run straight down their spines. The President took a long, shaky breath. He looked at the red emergency phone on the desk. His hand was trembling slightly as he reached for it. "I'm calling them right now. I will demand to know exactly what they think they're doing. Do they want to drag the entire Earth down with them?" Chapter 16. The Ark. Votes don't matter. When saving your own people is all that counts. The apocalypse countdown has begun. Inside the high-level recovery room, the emergency operations meeting was interrupted by a whistle. The ring of the encrypted red phone was shrill. It sounded like a sharp fingernail, scraping slowly across a sheet of glass. The sound echoed through the halls. It was deadly. Every eye in the room was glued to that phone. It was the last thing anyone wanted to see. The safety valve between the two world powers. When it rings, it usually means a level 10 crisis is unfolding. The old man sitting nearby crushed his cigarette in the ashtray. The sparks died out instantly. The last shred of hesitation vanished as the connection was made. I am the President of the United States. I demand to speak to your leadership immediately. This is a final warning, stripped of all diplomatic pleasantries. Through the static, a burst of exasperated shouting erupted. What are you doing? 3 hours ago, our reconnaissance satellites showed everything. Every single one of your ballistic missiles is in launch mode. The Bangkok reserves and the massive money transfers are happening now. Your entire industrial sector is shifting, and now even your nuclear subs have vanished. Whether you've gone mad or not, I am still here. I need a reasonable explanation right now, or I will consider this a mobilization. A mobilization for total war against us. I will activate the Trident strikes, and we will all die together. It was a blatant nuclear threat, a total lack of respect for our nation. In the conference room, a group of generals with stars on their shoulders sat with grim faces. Their knuckles cracked as they clenched their fists. Who could endure such an insult? The foreign minister took a deep breath, his rage simmering just beneath his collar. He prepared to respond with the harshest terms possible, even if diplomacy felt useless now. The procedure felt hollow and powerless, until a slender hand suddenly reached out to intervene. I looked at him and said, even though we are comrades, don't do anything reckless. The tension in the room was thick enough to cause a heart attack. I stepped forward to stop him, knowing that words alone wouldn't be enough. This wasn't child's play. It was a diplomatic crisis that could trigger World War III. The fate of the entire world was hanging by a thread. I looked at the phone and thought, you want an explanation? I'll give you one. But first, there was one thing I had to know. If they actually launch a nuclear strike against us, can we intercept it in time? I spoke up, and the old man lifted his eyelids, fixing me with a piercing gaze for 3 seconds. In that look, I saw a heavy burden of responsibility. But even more than that, I saw a cold, hard determination. We were gambling on the destiny of the country and the future of our people. I promised him right then that I wouldn't let a single nuclear warhead through. Not one will touch the soil of Dacia, the old man said calmly. In that case, I'll take the lead. And then, the old man slowly raised his hand. He signaled for the microphone and handed it to me, a silent transfer of absolute authority. I didn't waste time being polite. I grabbed the mic and didn't even bother to sit down. I just leaned casually against the edge of the table and spoke. Mr. President, this is Sue Ran, Special Advisor for the Source Project. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line for a moment. Then, his rage doubled. I don't know any Sue Ran. Put someone in charge on the line. I want answers, and I want them now. I let out a cold laugh and cut him off. I'll give you 2 words. M4 carbine. A suffocating chill filled the room as I spoke. I was referencing the exact serial numbers of the rifles from their failed Black Ops team. The voice on the other end died out like a strangled rooster. Inside the Oval Office at the White House, the silence was absolute. A group of high-ranking officials stared at each other in shock. They were completely bewildered by how I knew. I glanced at the electronic clock on the wall. Only 14 days left until the end. Now listen closely, Joe. Our time is precious. We don't have time to play your Cold War games or your little power struggles. Stop with these pathetic role-playing games. My voice traveled clearly across the ocean floor via undersea cables. You think we're preparing for war? You're thinking too small. To put it in a language you can understand, we're building a boat. Building a boat? What boat? He asked instinctively. His voice was laced with confusion and disbelief. The tone of the conversation had turned completely absurd to him. Think of it as Noah's Ark, I replied coolly. I let my fingers tap rhythmically against the table. Too bad for you. The tickets aren't for sale to the public. We're only saving our own. What the hell are you talking about? He barked back. Are you trying to tell me that God is going to send a flood? Maybe it won't be water, but there will definitely be fire. My gaze turned ice cold and my voice dropped to a low whisper. Mr. President, instead of wasting time monitoring our missile silos, you should tell your men to take a very close look at your own national park, Yellowstone, specifically 3,000 meters underground. The magma pressure is rising. It is abnormally high, and I smiled coldly as I spoke. Your monitoring stations are currently scrambling. Every single sensor you have should have already flagged a mountain of data by now. But you still think everything is normal, don't you? A deathly silence fell over the White House. The hand of the president's hand froze as he gripped the receiver. His arrogant pride began to crumble away. He snapped his head around abruptly. He glared at his science advisor, a gray-haired geologist cowering in the corner. The man held a tablet, his face as white as a sheet. He looked ready to collapse. Mr. President, the advisor's voice was thin and strained. 10 minutes ago, the magma pressure suddenly spiked by 300%. We're detecting strange biological infrasound waves. The report hasn't even reached your desk yet. How did this man from Dacia know? How do you know this? The president asked, his voice trembling with terror. I don't just know that. I know that this isn't even the worst of it. Because things are about to get dark. I also know that without immediate intervention, it's over. In 350 hours, at dawn on July 15th, you are all going to die a horrific death. If I were you, I wouldn't be standing here screaming into a phone. I'd be trying to figure out how to evacuate the tens of millions of people on your west coast toward the east. The president stood there like he'd been struck by lightning, his brain buzzing in a total void. The people of Dacia aren't preparing for war, they're running for their lives. And they're doing it with all their resources in a perfectly organized, premeditated plan. What does that mean? It means the scale of this disaster is beyond human imagination. You knew this all along, didn't you? The president's voice trembled, his previous arrogance extinguished in an instant. Tell me, what exactly is going to happen? Is it just a volcanic eruption? I replied coldly. Guess for yourself. The final exam for human civilization has already been handed out. We are busy writing our answers. As for you, good luck. You don't have much time left, America. Consider this the final gesture of goodwill from the East. Mobilize every bit of strength you have to dig holes and stockpile food. Reinforce your bunkers while you still can. Wait, don't hang up. We can cooperate. We have the technology. We have. Click. I slammed the phone back onto its base without a hint of hesitation. That sharp sound echoed through the command centers of both superpowers. It was the sound of an era coming to a violent end. The silence in our conference room was heavy, every general staring at me in shock. They couldn't believe what I'd just done. I had just hung up on the leader of the free world. I cut him off at the exact moment his world started to crumble, dropping a psychological nuke like that is more effective than any physical strike. I didn't just give him news, I shattered his entire reality. He was paralyzed. Is Yellowstone really going to erupt? The old general asked, his throat dry. I turned toward him, my expression cold. I rubbed my aching temples, thinking about the timeline. It had only been 3 days since the red rain started falling. These tremors were just the Earth's crust reacting to the poison. I felt I'd been too kind, giving those Westerners any warning at all. Confused? It's a tactic, but there's more to it than that. I remembered the rescue missions from 10 years after the apocalypse began. Among the zombies that swarmed our survival base back then, many of the threats to our security were actually foreign trash that had drifted in by sea. If every other country collapses completely, those hundreds of millions of undead ghosts will just spawn more monsters. If they stay alive, they can at least draw some of the enemy's fire away from us. I finished speaking and looked the old man straight in the eye, my gaze firm. As long as they are in chaos, we will remain stable. No one will bother us for the next 2 weeks, giving us time to heal and prepare. The old general looked out at the world and finally spoke. Su ran. He stood up slowly and began to straighten the collar of his Zhongshan suit. Well said. His eyes swept across the entire hall, his voice ringing out loud and powerful. Chaotic times demand severe punishment, and great disasters require drastic remedies. Comrade Su Ran is right. In this moment, who has time to worry about appearances? The old man stood up abruptly, his presence filling the room. He slammed his hand down on the table. Comrades, these are the laws of survival. In the past, we spoke of human life and dignity. We spoke of etiquette, justice, integrity, and honor, of loyalty, courage, and the grace of a great power. But when faced with total extinction, all of that is nonsense. Starting today, everything changes. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Minister of National Defense, every single position within this republic. Our external policy will follow Comrade Su Ran's standard. Be ruthless. Make them fear us. He swung his hand down violently. It was like watching a sharp blade, cutting through the old world once and for all. If we can protect the 1.4 billion people of Huaxia, what does it matter if the world calls us villains? Yes. A thunderous roar of agreement shook the entire hall. Relay my orders immediately. The conflict is already underway. Total lockdown is now at the highest level. Seal every single border. The coastlines are now under strict military control. I want 12 underground cities ready within 14 days. Push our fortifications to the absolute limit. Yes, Commander, the officers shouted as the state machine roared to life. This time, it wasn't a jog, it was a full-blown sprint. The probability of failure? 0.01%. Mass extinction was no longer an option now that the political obstacles were gone. Now, let's talk science, the old man said, his fingers tapping the table. He looked toward the group of white coats at the end of the long table. Does the Academy of Sciences have the results? Zhan Ziyuan, the president of the Science Society, stood up with trembling hands. He clutched a thin report so tightly the veins on his hands bulged. Commander, Advisor Su, he began, finding his voice. Zhan Ziyuan took a deep breath and activated the projection. The holographic screen flickered to life, instantly displaying a map. It showed the vast, deep reaches of space where 2 dead stars were entwined. They looked like twins, with the surrounding light warping into a strange, distorted vortex. The Academy of Sciences has exhausted every possible method to find the cause of the mutations. Yesterday, the Tianyang array captured something. We isolated abnormal wave patterns and ran them through 9 quantum computers. After 3 billion simulations, Zhan Ziyuan's voice trembled as he pointed to that patch of stars. I believe we have finally found the source, he said, his fingers shaking toward the 2 stars. They are located approximately 130 million light-years away from Earth. Deep within the Hydra constellation, a violent celestial merger is taking place. 2 neutron stars are colliding. An immediate uproar swept through the meeting hall at the mention of a neutron star merger. On a cosmic scale, such an event is nothing more than a tiny spark, a mere firework in the vastness of the universe. But for biological life, it is a harbinger of something far more terrifying than death. Zhan Ziyuan pulled up a simulated wave chart, where red peaks rose like jagged blades. The graph looked like a sword aimed directly at the heart of the Earth. The gamma-ray burst produced by this fusion will theoretically sweep across the entire Milky Way. It will bathe our galaxy in lethal radiation. But that isn't even the worst part of our findings. We analyzed the characteristics of the red mist sample I provided earlier. By tracing the model back to its origin, we discovered a horrifying truth. This specific merger is unlike anything we've ever seen. It is projecting a unique stream of particles. A high-energy dark matter virus is riding that wave at nearly the speed of light. Zhan Ziyuan glanced at his report and looked directly at me. It will reach Earth in exactly 14 days. One of the officials couldn't help but interrupt. He asked, can this thing really destroy the entire planet? In reality, the probability of a devastating impact is only 1.5%. That is the statistical chance of it wiping out Earth's biosphere. Zhan Ziyuan held up a single finger. From a purely scientific standpoint, the margin of error makes this almost impossible to predict. It is a low-probability event, practically negligible. The final number is 0.01%. That figure is strategically insignificant, a 1 in 10,000 chance. I had been silent since the beginning, but I suddenly spoke up. My voice was chillingly calm. In the casino of the apocalypse, the dealer doesn't care about odds. He only needs one card to change everything. It's coming, and it will be more violent than any model predicts. In my past life, those experts died never understanding how one event could rewrite human existence. The Earth's genetic code is being rewritten as the planet tries to unify. They thought it was just simple pollution. In reality, it's a genetic strike launched from the depths of the universe. Comrade Su Ran is right, the old man said. His voice was heavy as he added. We have already verified every possible source. We can't afford any more illusions. The threat is already unfolding. The atmosphere in the conference room shifted instantly. The tension was no longer fueled by blind panic. The fear had become focused and sharp. Compared to fighting unknown ghosts and gods, a physical strike at least gave us a target to blame for our extinction. Since a biological mutation is confirmed, we know exactly what we're facing. I stood up from my chair and walked toward the massive world map. Chief, I said, catching his attention, I have a proposal. It is a massive undertaking, but it is our most powerful option. It might sound insane, but it is the only way to increase our odds. It is the only way to ensure our survival. What are we talking about? The old man asked with a heavy pause. He fixed me with a piercing gaze, waiting for my response. I met his eyes, a ruthless light shining in my own. It was the kind of look that made the entire room hold its breath. And the chief? He knew that look well. He understood exactly what that expression meant coming from me. Every time I wore that face, I was about to strike a devastating blow. I requested maximum field authorization immediately. I demanded the power to execute a full-scale biological elimination plan. Those words exploded like a depth charge in the conference room. Elimination? What does that even mean? The Minister of Agriculture stammered. In the literal sense, I replied coldly. I raised my hand and made a sharp cutting motion through the air. The red rain is coming, and the mutation speed of plants and animals will defy logic. A common house cat will transform into a bloodthirsty beast the size of a cheetah. Rats in the sewers will swarm and gnaw through armored vehicles in seconds. As long as I'm breathing, I will fight to stop this nightmare before it starts. Because the red rain is only the beginning of our problems. We cannot let them fall. Mobilize the army and the chemical units immediately. We must smother every creature capable of mutating right in its cradle. A deathly silence descended over the entire conference room. Even the generals, men who lived and breathed war, were shocked by the cruelty of it. This wasn't just a strategy, it was a total extermination plan. Su Ran, this is excessive, an old general barked, slamming his fist on the table. He stood up, his face flushed deep red with pure rage. Forget whether this is even possible for a moment. Even if it were, it would trigger a massive, uncontrollable panic. People are waiting for state aid, and you want us to go in and kill their pets? Social order will collapse before the disaster even hits. I looked him in the eye. If the order collapses, it can be rebuilt. But if we are all dead, there is nothing left to build. You will live to regret today's mercy. I could still see the tragedies of my past life clearly in my mind. The horrors of that previous timeline were still very much alive to me. The first wave of chaos was terrifying enough on its own. Humanity barely held on then, relying on firearms to keep the monsters at bay. But what truly shattered our defenses was the great mutation of the second week. Swarms of mutant birds so thick they blotted out the very sun, and tides of mutant rats that swarmed every corner of the earth. That was true despair. Every pair of eyes in the room shifted at once. They all turned toward the old man sitting at the head of the table. The choice before him was agonizing. On one side, a potential future threat that could end us all. On the other, public opinion and the fragile stability of the present. The old man closed his eyes, his fingers tracing the edge of the desk. A full minute passed before he opened them, revealing a gaze hardened by resolve. He looked at the nations of the world and then back at me. Then, the old man spoke 2 words. No. Rejected. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried a crushing weight. The general next to him tried to speak, but the old man raised a hand to silence him. Comrade Suran, I understand your mindset, he said calmly, but I cannot authorize this. I frowned and stepped forward, knowing this was the only way to kill the danger. Chief, this is the most effective way to eliminate the hidden threats, I argued. Showing mercy now isn't kindness, it's a death sentence for our people. The old man stood up and walked slowly toward the massive wall map. With a wave of his hand, he said, First, it is impossible. Daxiao is too vast. How many birds and wild beasts are hiding in the deep forests? Trillions, tens of trillions of living creatures. Even if every single bullet in the army was fired, we couldn't hit them all. You can't kill every single rat. They'll just keep coming. You can't get rid of every cockroach either. And you'll never find the insect eggs hidden deep underground. Once the red rain arrives, they will all mutate regardless. I stayed silent, knowing he was right. Eradicating the threat at the root was nearly impossible. The chief turned back toward me, his gaze sharp and piercing. Second, he continued, even if we somehow purged the entire country and turned our land into a sterile, safe zone, what about the threats from outside our borders? Won't the packs of mutant wolves from Siberia just hunt their way south? Won't the swarms of mutant insects from Southeast Asia migrate north? We cannot simply wall off our borders and hope for the best. I looked at him, my mind racing through the logistics. Then he moved on to his third point. This is the most important point of all, he said. The old man pointed to his own chest, his voice dropping an octave. Our goal is to preserve civilization. But if, in order to survive, we start now, a large-scale massacre of living things, even if we point our guns at pets, is something we can't afford. If we target ordinary people's lives, what's the difference between us and the monsters? Before the red rain even falls, our reputation would be ruined. Foreign powers are just waiting for an excuse to attack us. If you light a fire here, they will immediately accuse us of crimes against humanity, and they might even unite for a military intervention. At that point, how do we justify ourselves? The old man walked up to me, his presence heavy and wise. He tapped my shoulder, his tone becoming deeply sincere. You are a sharp weapon, he said. That's good, but governing a great nation is like frying a small fish, delicate. Some things cannot be viewed simply as progress. It isn't just a math problem. We have to take into account the political considerations. I took a deep, steadying breath. My tense body began to relax. I slowly let the pressure fade away. I fell silent for a moment. I had to admit the chief was right. In my past life, I was a lone wolf. Back then, my only goal was survival, and killing threats was the only logic I knew. But now, I carry the weight of an entire nation on my shoulders. A country is a massive machine, and one wrong move can break everything. A scorched earth policy might solve the immediate problem, but it's not a real solution for a whole civilization. If we can't eliminate the source of the threat by killing our own people, then we have no choice but to turn our home into an impenetrable fortress. We need more firepower, more automatic cannons, thicker alloy walls to withstand the coming shock. The chief smiled, and the heavy atmosphere vanished instantly. Give him everything he asks for, he commanded. That hunger for more firepower, that phobia of being outgunned. Every man in our military shares that same obsession. I looked at the carrier. It was mine now as the countdown in my pocket ticked on. 13 days remaining. The sun blazed down on the depths of the Utah and Colorado plateaus. Rumor has it this was the site of the 2012 Doomsday Bunkers. Now, the desolate desert was under total military control, crawling with soldiers armed to the teeth. 3 lines of defense were already in place. The Pentagon was moving fast. So fast it reeked of cold, calculated capitalism. In a leather chair, a Mont-Blanc pen spun rapidly between a man's fingers. If the great hero was already digging holes, it didn't mean destruction, it meant a reshuffle. The president sat up straight, his political greed finally outweighing his fear. This was an opportunity to hoard every resource while the rest of the world fell into chaos. In the new world, we would own everything. Launch Project Eden, the president ordered coldly. Activate every single bunker. He was digging up ghosts from the past. Cold War relics and national strategic reserves were being brought back to life. Chief of Staff Jefferson hesitated, struggling to find the words. Mr. President, we have a problem with capacity. Our bunkers can only hold a maximum of 20 million people. But we have over 300 million citizens. The president didn't even blink. Then start the selection process and sell the remaining tickets to Wall Street and to the giants of Silicon Valley and Hollywood. $100 million a seat. No credit, no IOUs, only gold and hard currency for the remaining spots. The rest go to the military and the top scientists. Resources are limited, so we have to be selective. Only the elites are meant to survive this. As for the other hundreds of millions of citizens, the president just crossed himself and muttered, God bless them. But the Secretary of Defense cut in, his voice heavy. Mr. President, even that isn't enough. His face had grown grimmer with every passing day this month. The global market was already a smoking ruin. Everything was collapsing. The Chinese have already bought up all the grain and rare metals on the market. A cold light flashed in the president's eyes as he replied, then steal it. He wasn't going to let anyone stand in his way. He ordered his ships and planes to intercept the evacuations on the high seas. Specifically, the ship carrying 30 of our top experts. I I watched the radar as they closed in on the Champagne. That ship was the prize they were desperate to snatch. The president didn't care about diplomacy anymore as he grabbed the phone. His voice was raw and filled with a primal, predatory instinct. He ordered the 7th Fleet to intercept the Champagne and issue a brutal ultimatum. If China wanted their people back, they had to trade the supplies I had gathered. I want half of everything, he barked, and if they refuse, then let those brilliant scientists of theirs feed the sharks in the middle of the ocean. The transmission cut out, leaving only the sound of static. Under a canopy of dark clouds, the massive Champagne struggled against the tide. It rocked violently in the waves, surrounded by 4 Arleigh Burke-class destroyers. They had moved into position, boxing us in completely. Were they planning to tear us apart like a pack of wolves? Their massive cannons rose from the water's surface, pointing their cold, steel muzzles directly at our deck. Further out, a cold monster emerged, the nuclear-powered aircraft carrier, the Reagan. It sat there as the absolute overlord of these waters. A fortress of 4mm reinforced steel, 90,000 tons of sheer, crushing weight. It felt like a final judgment hanging over us, a silent death sentence for everyone on board. The video feed from the Champagne flickered to life. It showed the standoff between the American Marines and our own Chinese forces. Suddenly, a voice crackled over the public frequency. It was arrogant, loud, and dripping with condescension. I don't care who you are on that ship, the voice boomed. Stop your vessel immediately for inspection. I repeat, stop your ship. Right now, if you don't, we will sink you where you sit. This is absolute madness, the captain of the Champagne roared. His eyes were bloodshot as he screamed into his radio. We are a civilian vessel carrying scholars back to their homeland. This is the open Pacific. You have no right to enforce your laws here. Might makes right, the voice on the other end replied with pure contempt. You have 5 minutes to lower your flag and kill your engines. The atmosphere in the cabin turned heavy and tragic. 30 gray-haired professors stood there, some clutching hard drives, others shielding their manuscripts with their own bodies. Their hands were shaking, but their backs remained perfectly straight. In short, we cannot back down. One professor adjusted his glasses, his hands trembling with resolve. I'd rather die than surrender. Back at the command center, the general slammed his fist onto the mahogany table, shattering the wood. His teacup rattled and tipped over. Scalding tea spilled across the floor as he glared at the screen. Once the apocalypse truly begins, our industrial rebirth will depend entirely on those scholars. Can we send the Liwa Yuan? No, it's too late. The staff officer's face turned pale. The nearest escort ship is at least 3 hours away, but the Americans only gave them 5 minutes. The old general sat in his chair, his face like iron and his chest heaving. I could see the suppressed rage boiling inside him, but the distance was just too great. At this exact moment, unless a miracle intervenes, there is nothing left to do but watch them die. By the way, the old man suddenly asked. Su Ran said an hour ago he had personal business and cut communications. Before he could even finish his sentence, the satellite feed on the big screen flickered. A series of red alerts flashed across the monitor. Look, what is that? Everyone in the room gasped. My eyes scanned the horizon as the world blurred past. The ocean below was a chaotic, churning mess. Over the Pacific, a sleek black fighter jet tore through the air. It bore no markings and flew at a dangerously low altitude. I skimmed the surface of the sea, defying every law of aerodynamics. The speed was insane, leaving a violent wake in my path. A white trail kilometers long carved a scar across the water. That's the Xiongnu prototype, a technical officer screamed back at base. I was piloting the very machine they only used for wind tunnel tests, and now I had unleashed it upon the Pacific sky. Though I was cramped inside the narrow cockpit, my awakened body easily ignored the terrifying G-force crushing me. I looked down at the world like a god of steel. The enemy fleet looked like tiny toys from this height. My eyes remained as calm as stagnant water, remembering the past. In my previous life, that carrier, the Reagan, was a total tyrant. It used its planes and nuclear power to pillage the coastlines. Its deck is stained with the blood of countless survivors. In this life, since our paths have crossed so early, I'll settle every old debt right now. A pirate is still a pirate. A leopard never changes its spots. My fingers brushed against the control stick. Since you've delivered yourselves to my doorstep, I won't be polite. I let my hand linger on the throttle. If you're looking for a fight, I'm more than happy to oblige. I slammed the communication button and hacked directly into the American public channel. I am Su Ran. My voice was low, but it echoed with absolute clarity. It rang through the command centers of every single ship in the fleet. The entire American war machine heard me, especially the Reagan. Did you come all this way just to greet me? I asked. No, that's not it. I'm here to show you how to make deep-sea ice out of your own wreckage. I've set my sights on your flagship. The radio crackled with their arrogant laughter. Are you still dreaming, kid? A voice barked back. Do you even know who you're talking to? This is the Reagan, a 100,000-ton beast powered by dual reactors. I stared down at the massive, uninterrupted deck. I counted 70 F-18 fighters lined up like toys. The sight was beautiful, and I wanted it all for myself. Without another word, I pushed my fighter into a steep dive. I tore through their defensive perimeter like it wasn't even there. I moved like a ghost, cutting through the air until I was directly overhead. I brought the jet to a dead halt, hovering right above the carrier's deck. This hovering tech was the crown jewel of our flight research. Hanging there at 50 meters, I watched the American pilots freeze in shock. "Shoot him down," their commander screamed over the comms. But in that moment, I felt a strange sense of peace. My heart hammered against my ribs with an inexplicable rhythm. The enemy roared in fury, but they were already too late. I threw open the cockpit canopy and let the freezing wind rush in. "Thanks for the gift," I whispered to the empty air. My hair whipped wildly around my face in the gale. I wasn't planning on jumping out. I wasn't going anywhere. I was just getting started. I stood there like a god looking down from the heavens. I slowly lowered my right hand toward the surface. I reached out toward that giant, mountain-like ship. I tore through the void, watching space itself unfold before me. Thousands of terrified, desperate eyes watched from below. It looked as if a giant hand had violently crumpled the ocean. There was no explosion and no light, only a bone-shaking tremor. Just like that. In the very next second, it happened. A 100,000-ton nuclear carrier, over 300 meters long. The ship and the 100 fighters on its deck vanished into thin air. Immediately after the carrier evaporated, thousands of American soldiers were left suspended in midair. They dropped into the sea like lead weights. Tens of thousands of tons of seawater suddenly lost their support. The ocean collapsed inward toward the empty center. Terrifying whirlpools and 30-meter waves erupted everywhere. I realized something was very wrong for them. For destroyers surrounding the carrier began tossing wildly in the surf. The invincible American soldiers were now paralyzed with pure terror. Some even fell to their knees, crossing themselves in the pouring rain. My face was slightly pale, but I felt a surge of power. 15 days of extreme pressure had pushed my mental strength to a new level. Storing a whole carrier was exhausting, but I wasn't going to faint. I banked my fighter in an elegant circle and reopened the public channel. I told them to tell their president this was just compensation for my emotional distress. I warned them that if China lost even a single flake of paint, the White House would be the next thing to disappear. A deathly silence fell over the 4 remaining destroyers. They looked like terrified crates bobbing in the water, not warships. Not a single soldier dared to even look at a weapon. They were desperate to show me their goodwill now. They scrambled to turn their cannons away and retreated in the opposite direction. I turned my focus toward the Chongfeng Gault and the old professor on deck. He was standing there, watching me from the ship. Tears were already streaming down his face. He stood tall and gave me a shaky, non-standard military salute. I spoke clearly. "Professor, I am Su Ran, Special Advisor of Peach Blossom Spring. I have been ordered to bring you home." My voice echoed across every inch of the ship. I used my mental strength to make sure every soul on board heard me. A sudden appearance. "Head home at full speed. Our fighter squadrons are already waiting for you in the high seas. You're on the screen now." The cigarette in the old man's hand burned down to his fingers, but he didn't even feel it. He just kept his eyes locked on the monitor. That massive vortex of power slowly exhaled a breath of cold air. My vision was blurry, but I knew I had struck a perfect blow. The old man slammed his fist violently against the table. The haze of uncertainty in his eyes was instantly swept away. "This is the civilizational gap," he muttered. "They're just playing at war. I wasn't about to leave our people to those pirates." The Ministry of Foreign Affairs received immediate orders from Mr. J. The old man stood up, his presence as radiant and piercing as a rainbow. "No need for a protest," he declared. "Issue a direct statement instead. Given the supernatural phenomena occurring in the Pacific region, and for the sake of protecting human life, specifically the lives of American personnel, we suggest that every single American vessel be withdrawn immediately or they will face the consequences. And by the way, add one more sentence to that. We express our deepest regrets for the losses caused by these unidentified flying objects." Inside the White House, smash, the president hurled a priceless antique vase against the wall, shattering it to pieces. He grabbed the chief of staff by the collar, looking like a cornered beast. "What do you mean? Our most advanced nuclear carrier is gone. The past has been transformed into a different world, turned to smoke by Su Ran, just like magic?" The president's face burned with a mix of rage and panic. But the nightmare was only beginning. A new piece of data had just been leaked. Our total vulnerability on the high seas was now exposed to the world. Leaked by hackers. The chief of staff turned on the TV with trembling hands. CNN News was blaring. Times Square in New York was already a sea of fire. Angry citizens were brandishing signs that screamed, "We want to live." But survival wasn't their only demand. "We want tickets," they roared, charging straight through the police lines. The thin blue line of the police force collapsed instantly. Looting and arson were breaking out everywhere. The collapse was happening much sooner than expected. Damn it. Damn it all. President Emmanuel Macron just announced that France is unable to defend itself. He collapsed onto the floor, completely powerless. He knows that the social order in the United States is officially over. Chapter 19. Friends who visit are greeted with fine wine. But for the jackals who come knocking, we have rifles. Doomsday countdown. Day 10. You can't wrap fire in paper. It's going to burn through eventually. The video of the IG's disappearance was suppressed, and certain regions were even cut off from the global network. But the panic is like a massive flood. The dams are broken, and there's no stopping the surge. It wasn't Wall Street stocks that crashed first, it was the people's spirit. With my super shelters rising and Yellowstone ready to blow, a chain reaction started. The Western elites who were still hesitating instantly tore off their masks of composure. Private jets swarmed the flight paths, crowding the skies, all of them pointing in the exact same direction. They were all heading east, straight toward the northwest border. The Pamir Pass, the narrow gorge connecting east and west. Right now, it had become the final gateway into China. For dozens of miles, the roads were choked with vehicles from every Western nation. Luxury sedans were abandoned in the middle of the road. Diplomatic plates and military trucks sat idle as the freezing wind howled past. The air was thick with a fear so heavy it felt frozen in time. I need to see your commanding officer immediately. In front of the barbed wire, the regional envoy, Reborn, waved his documents frantically. His face was flushed red as he screamed at Zhao Gang. This is a crime against humanity. You cannot close this border. Under the UN Human Rights Convention and refugee regulations, you must comply. You must grant unconditional asylum to these civilians. Behind him, tens of thousands of people had gathered in a desperate mass. Some wore high-end designer suits while dragging expensive suitcases through the dirt. But most were armed mercenaries, escorting the families of the wealthy elite. Zhao Gang, the border regiment commander, slowly placed his hand on his holster. His eyes were as cold as the mountain ice. This is a restricted military zone. Anyone who crosses that line will be shot dead. No warning shots. Do you dare? Lebrun jabbed his finger right in Zhao Gang's face, his voice rising to a screech. Spit flew from his mouth as he yelled, I am the EU envoy. Behind me stands the very heart of Western civilization. Do you really want to be isolated from the rest of the world? If you don't open these shelters, we will launch sanctions, or even a military intervention. Behind Lebrun, the barrels of several Challenger battle tanks began to pivot. They turned slowly, locking onto our position with a silent threat. It was pure, blatant intimidation, a trick that used to work every time. But today, Zhao Gang just sneered and prepared to give the order. He was ready to put the entire regiment on maximum combat alert. Suddenly, a bone-shaking sonic boom ripped through the sky. An ear-splitting roar echoed as a black fighter jet streaked into view. It tore through the clouds, leaving a terrifying wake behind it. Like a bolt of black lightning, it suddenly banked and hovered. It hung vertically in the air, directly over the borderline. The cockpit slid open, revealing me standing there as the engines thundered. I made a tactical landing, kicking up a massive cloud of dust as I hit the ground. I stood up slowly, brushed the dirt off my knees, and scanned the crowd. I scanned the dark crowd standing before me. Zhao Gang immediately snapped to attention and saluted me. I returned the salute with a sharp nod. Then I turned my gaze toward Lebrun, who was still fuming. I tilted my head and spoke calmly. I heard you were planning to sanction us. I picked at my ear, acting like he wasn't even worth my time. Lebrun swallowed hard, instinctively flinching at my presence. He took a half step back, but forced himself to maintain his posture. Mr. Su, since you are here, let us be clear. Your underground city project requires global support. It needs the world's resources to survive. We are demanding 50 million spots inside those shelters. It is only fair. If you refuse, we reserve the right to act. We will use nuclear weapons to break through your barriers. Lebrun glared at me with dark, desperate eyes. He thought he held the ultimate trump card. He believed our defense systems couldn't handle a strike from his side. He really thought he could force my hand. Saturation strikes, he hissed. We all die together. Make your choice. The Western media journalists were watching with hungry eyes. They pressed their camera shutters frantically, broadcasting this historic confrontation via satellite to every corner of the globe, impacting every living soul. The entire world held its breath, waiting for my response. Would I compromise, or would we go to war? I didn't say a word at first. I just smiled, a bright, cold smile. Ignoring the threat of a nuclear strike, I took a single step forward. I stared Lebrun straight in the eyes. You really think those launch buttons are still under your control? Your officials have already crawled into their deep rock shelters, haven't they? They've already sacrificed you. Go ahead, check for yourself. The color drained from Lebrun's face. As his expression shifted into pure terror, he froze right where he stood. Lebrun pointed a finger at me, his hand shaking violently. It looked like he had Parkinson's. Don't point that at me, I said coldly. I don't like it. I swiped his finger away and looked toward the winding border road. I gestured toward the snowy mountains stretching out behind us. Space, release, I whispered under my breath. Over the last 15 days, we had excavated 12 underground supercities. Our construction engineers had unearthed millions of tons of rock and debris. All that waste had nowhere to go. So I had swept it all into a corner of my spatial dimension to gather dust. Now, it was time to take out the trash. A massive roar shook the earth as a literal mountain surged out of the void. When the thick clouds of dust finally settled, the crowd stood frozen in shock. The wide gorge road had completely vanished. In its place stood a jagged wall of earth and stone 50 meters high. It stretched across the horizon like a scar on the planet. The National Gateway was now hermetically sealed, a physical barrier that no army could bypass. Witchcraft, this is demonic sorcery. Lebrun collapsed to the ground. His mind broke completely as I stood calmly at the foot of my new mountain. I looked straight into the global livestream camera and spoke to the world. My voice boomed through the high-altitude speakers, echoing across the pass. It reached every corner of the planet, carrying the weight of China's resolve. China doesn't support parasites, and we certainly don't help ingrates. When you were busy blocking our technology, you didn't expect this day, did you? When you were building trade barriers to crush us, you didn't see this coming. I can state this very clearly right now. I casually brushed the dust and debris off my hands. My gaze suddenly sharpened, cutting through the cold air. Our resources are not free for the taking. Our people worked through sleepless nights and tightened their belts to build this. The world watched their screens in total, stunned silence. Back home, the citizens of China felt a surge of pride. Many had tears in their eyes as they finally exhaled. The suffocating pressure we had endured for centuries was finally lifting. In this single moment, the debt was being settled. It felt incredible, pure, cold satisfaction. Then, my tone shifted abruptly as I scanned the crowd. I spotted a few figures trying to stay low in the back. I'm not completely unreasonable. The gates of China aren't welded shut forever. But those gates won't open for these politicians or the tycoons standing behind them. First, we want the world's top scientists, the true architects of knowledge. I don't care about your nationality. If you have the mind, we have the space. As long as they pass our S-rank evaluation, they can bring 3 members of their inner circle. That includes immediate family. Second, we are looking for high-end industrial machinery. The kind of advanced tech that serves as the foundation for global industry. We want rare ores and priceless historical antiquities for our collections. Those who provide these can trade them for a temporary right of residency. As for the rest of you, I turned my back on them without another word. I jumped into the cockpit of my fighter jet and fired up the engines. I gave one final, dismissive wave toward the crowd below. Enjoy yourselves while the catastrophe is still on its way, I muttered. And don't forget to dig deeper. That's my final piece of advice. The X-Yuan interceptor let out a deafening roar. Blue flames erupted from the thrusters, scorching the air. I soared into the sky, vanishing toward the eastern horizon and leaving the western elite behind. They stood there, staring in despair at the insurmountable mountain wall. The sound of screaming and wailing filled the pass. One man's voice cracked as he shrieked, "No, I'll give you 10 billion. 10 billion US dollars. Just let me in. Let me in. I'm an aristocrat. I have oil fields. I have gold. I demand to see your leaders." But the only response was the cold barrels of the border guards' rifles. That and the silent, towering wall of lamentations. It stood as a symbol of France's legacy. A nation caught between life and death in a room full of nonsense. I looked at the screen in the early warning center. Watching this chaotic, satisfying scene, I felt my ego finally settling. I lit a cigarette, thinking, "You little bastards," and exhaled a cloud of smoke. The expression on my face was the only thing that mattered now. A smirk tugged at my lips involuntarily. I had transformed a lifetime of hatred into this moment. My life had finally reached its absolute climax. My holographic projection appeared near the conference table. I was exhausted, but my eyes burned with a terrifying, sharp intensity. When you're covered in lice, you stop feeling the itch. When you're drowning in debt, you stop feeling the weight. There was absolutely no way I would change my mind. I wouldn't let a single one of those blood-sucking leaders through. Title 20, The Blood of Indulgence. The Gulf was about to detonate. Persian Gulf, 100, the countdown begins. Day 8. Location coordinates locked. East China Sea, Hanoi National Base. The Zhoushan Oil Reserve. The air is thick. The heavy scent of gas hangs over everything. A vaporized cocktail of fuel and asphalt. There are more than enough. Massive oil tanks here to fuel a nation. Millions of tons of crude oil sleep peacefully beneath the surface. This is the lifeblood of our industry. Advisor Sue ran. The medical team we assigned you is already waiting nearby. Gordon looked at my pale face, his eyebrows knitting together in worry. He could tell I was reaching my limit after what happened on the Premier Plateau. You nearly fainted yesterday. Today, you're trying to move. 30 million tons. Can your brain handle it? I didn't look back. I just stared down at my trembling palms, feeling hundreds of steel needles stabbing my brain. They twisted and sharpened like an electric drill grinding into my skull. You know, I said, looking at the massive structures about to be taken into my space. This mountain of oil and steel. Suddenly, I opened my mouth. If I'm pushing myself to the brink right now, then so be it. If I lit a cigarette and tossed it in there, what would happen? Would it be more beautiful than New Year's fireworks? Gordon's face twitched. It would be magnificent, so bright the entire Yangtze River Delta would see it. But he didn't come here to listen to jokes. He had orders to ensure my safety. He was terrified my body would simply give out. My body can still hold on, I said, forcing a smirk, and a man never says no. Even when you're on the verge of death, you have to keep up appearances. But I wasn't joking. The deep ache in my brain was worse than a soul-crushing wound. The struggle had evolved into a slow, agonizing corrosion of my mind. Every use of my power felt like sanding down my nerves with coarse paper, but I didn't have a second to rest. I stepped forward and pressed my palm against the cold oil pipeline valves. This pain was nothing compared to seeing my people in my past life, watching them slaughter each other over half a liter of diesel. Compared to that, this familiar agony felt almost pleasant. It was time. Storing solids is like carrying, but liquids? Storing liquids is like swallowing them whole. My consciousness shifted instantly. I became an invisible, giant dragon, my will surging forward. I raced along the pipeline, claiming everything in my path. Thick, viscous black liquid surged through the darkness. It flowed deep within the bottomless pipelines. This was the black gold of industry, and I was claiming every drop. Suddenly, the pressure inside me hit its limit. Blood sprayed from my nostrils, staining my combat uniform a deep scarlet. Boom, boom, boom. There was no explosion. Instead, a massive roar of negative pressure tore through the air. The massive pipeline began to twist and groan. It sounded as if a gluttonous beast was trapped inside. It was sucking the oil out with savage intensity. The needle on the pressure gauge spun wildly. It dropped from maximum to zero in a heartbeat. 30 minutes passed in a blur of agony. The Joshan base, the energy heart of the East, was now empty. Everything in my vision suddenly went pitch black. The world around me looked like a shattered snow globe. Several military doctors rushed toward me, frantic. They tried to force an oxygen tube into my mouth, but I shoved them back. I wiped the blood from my face, my voice sounding like grinding sand. There's no time. Get me to the plane. Where do you think you're going now? Li Buodong snapped. He was practically screaming, telling me I had to stop and rest immediately. I lifted my head and looked him in the eye. My pupils were glowing with a strange, watery green light. Rest later, I said, pushing his hands away. Get me on that plane. The national reserves are dry, and it's not enough. We're going to the Middle East. I was going to collect 10 years' worth of oil contracts in a single trip. We arrived at a massive oil port in the Persian Gulf. The scorching sun beat down without mercy. The desert heat was suffocating. The air twisted and rippled over the horizon where a dozen supertankers waited. These VLCC carriers, flying the 5-star red flag, were docked and ready to mobilize. Together, they looked like a great wall of steel floating on the sea. But as I stepped onto the docks, I realized there was a problem. Standing there was a man, a prince, perhaps? He was dressed in a flowing white robe. Wearing a checkered keffiyeh, he watched my team and me with sharp eyes. He watched us descend from the private jet, his face full of confusion. "Oh, my friend," he began. The prince spoke in broken, clumsy Chinese. He opened his arms wide as he approached me. "I don't understand why you're demanding our entire country's supply, including every long-term electrolyte contract for the next 10 years, to be delivered right here, today. How can your fleet even load it? The numbers are astronomical. By any normal business logic." He was right. This was completely standard thinking. But what I was doing was pure madness. No port in the world could process this much oil at once. Not in a single afternoon, and certainly not with the ships we had. I stepped back, refusing the prince's embrace. I had to keep my focus. I looked out at the massive crude oil terminals stretching into the distance. The sheer volume of oil waiting there was staggering. The sun was too intense, making my head spin and my vision blur. My nose began to bleed again, the warm copper taste hitting my lip. But I didn't care about my own physical limits anymore. I wiped the blood away without stopping. Money talks, and I was here to close the deal. "Is the payment cleared?" I asked. "Paid in full. Our reputation is worth more than a 1.5% fee. Everyone's credit is still good here, and there's a 30% bonus on top." The prince shrugged, but wanting this much luck, all at once, simply doesn't fit the logistics. "Paying is enough." I interrupted him, my gaze sweeping past the dock toward the horizon. Oil fields and storage tanks stretched out as far as the eye could see. This was the beating heart of the world's energy. To me, it looked like a giant self-service buffet. In China, we have an old saying, "What's in your pocket is what's safe." My lips curled into a smirk. Since the money and goods are settled, don't worry about how I transport it. Then, I made a move no Middle Eastern tycoon could fathom. I didn't wait for the tankers to take the cargo, but instead ordered the men to dismantle the main pipeline, 2 meters in diameter. In front of everyone at the port, I stepped forward and shoved my hand directly into the mouth of the pipe. Crude oil was still spraying out. This was madness. It was a high-pressure line. The crowd froze in pure horror, but in that moment, their screams died in their throats as their eyes nearly popped out of their heads. My eyes widened, and the veins in my forehead pulsed wildly like a storm. This was it. I pushed my spiritual force to its absolute limit. This wasn't just about storing simple objects anymore. I reached into the massive industrial system and ripped the plug out. The crude oil that should have sprayed everywhere vanished the second it touched my palm. The suction was so violent it created a massive siphon effect throughout the pipeline. 1 kilometer upstream, at the transfer station, the oil pressure plummeted to zero instantly. 10 kilometers away, at the refinery, red alarm lights flashed frantically as the storage tanks began to drain. The massive, endless floating roofs of the reservoirs began to sink at a terrifying speed. The drop was visible to the naked eye, and back at the harbor, the prince fell to his knees. His golden scepter hit the ground as he wondered, is he a devil or a god? Inside my own consciousness, a black ocean began to form. It was a dark, perfectly still sea of oil. No evaporation, no pollution, just floating quietly in the void of my space. Then, with a violent crack, I snapped the connection shut. I coughed up a thick mouthful of blood. I fell backward like a kite with its string cut, my vision fading into total darkness. I could still feel that warm, black liquid filling the final piece of the puzzle I had prepared. Li Gaodong rushed toward me, his voice sounding hoarse and strained, as if it were being ground through a millstone. Using every ounce of my remaining strength, I reached out and grabbed Li Gaodong's collar, my voice as faint as a bird's. My words were thin as silk threads, yet sharp and biting. Each word felt heavy as a corpse. Enough, let's go home. After saying that, my hand fell limp at my side. The distant setting sun was a deep, bloody red, staining the entire surface of the Persian Gulf as the plane took off. Looking down at the Arabian Peninsula, it gradually receded below us. Li Gaodong looked at me, my brow still furrowed. Even in my coma, his eyes were bloodshot and raw. He turned his head to look out the window toward the east and whispered, "Kid, you've already done enough. Now it's time for us to do our part." The evacuation began, and it was finally our turn to act. It was the 7th day of the Dragon's Song, the final countdown to the apocalypse, and anxiety hung heavy in the air. It wasn't just the rumors flying across the internet. Even the street vendors felt it. The fruit crepe lady downstairs knew something was wrong. Construction trucks were swarming the city, clogging the streets during rush hour. Morning and night, the chaos never stopped. Then there were the supermarkets. The shelves were stripped bare, so empty that even the bottom shelf items were gone. Even those disgusting coriander-flavored instant noodles had been snatched up. But the real panic set in when the landmarks started closing down. The museums, the libraries, the massive stadiums. Places that were usually buzzing with life and noise. By the next morning, every single one of them had been locked down under military-grade seals. One guy tried to sneak a photo, but the second he pulled out his phone, grim-faced plainclothes officers dragged him off the street for questioning. A crushing weight settled over the country, like a mountain about to collapse. A storm was brewing, ready to swallow every inch of our 9.6 million square kilometers of land. Inside the command center, the ashtrays were overflowing with cigarette butts. The gears of the capital were turning, locked into a desperate, final rhythm. Cigarette butts piled up like miniature mountains. On the giant screen, the data flickered relentlessly. The social stability index for the entire country was climbing at a terrifying rate, hitting the critical red zone. We couldn't suppress the information anymore. The propaganda chief's voice sounded hoarse, as if he'd swallowed hot coals when he asked me for orders. If we didn't give the public an explanation soon, we wouldn't even need to wait for the disaster. The sheer panic would tear us apart from the inside. Riots were brewing, and rumors claimed we were going to sacrifice half the population to summon a god. I sat in the shadows of the corner, watching the chaos unfold. My face was pale, but my eyes remained terrifyingly calm. "Stop suppressing it," I said. "Tell them the truth." Li Gaodong froze, shocked. "That will cause total chaos for 1.4 billion people." "Then tell them half," I replied, walking toward the map and pointing my finger firmly. I tapped 12 massive red coordinates, my voice turning ice cold. "Tell them a major catastrophe is about to strike. But make it clear that the state is the only power capable of facing this crisis, and we will be standing right by their side. We only have 7 days left, so the evacuation has to start now. We need to begin the triage of technical talent immediately. Senior skilled workers and engineers. Get priority access to the shelters." But then a flash of cruelty crossed my eyes. I wasn't going to be soft. I ordered a strict investigation into anyone trying to use the back door. In turbulent times, people don't fear scarcity, they fear inequality. If they see the elite cutting the line, the country will explode before the first monster bites. The chief minister listened in silence before slowly raising his eyelids. His gaze was piercing as he said, "Comrade Su Ran is right. Even if everyone were starving, they could accept it if the burden was shared. Our people aren't fragile. For 5,000 years, we've faced floods and earthquakes. There isn't a plague or disaster we haven't seen and survived. As long as the pillars above them don't collapse, the people will follow." He leaned against the table, his silhouette as straight and unyielding as a mountain. He added one final order. "If there's trouble, the army handles it. If the sky falls, the giants will shoulder the weight." Then, at exactly noon, without any warning, across the entire territory of China, from the prosperous Bund in Shanghai to the most isolated mountain outposts, tens of thousands of air raid sirens began to wail simultaneously. The sirens wailed in perfect, terrifying unison. Waves of sound tore through the air, surging over the cities like a physical tide. Countless birds took flight in a panicked frenzy. Then, every television channel, radio station, and giant billboard went dark. Even the glowing advertisements on taxi roofs cut their signals. The broadcast changed. This was it. Finally, the plan was in motion. The familiar, resolute face of the chief minister appeared on every screen in the nation. He wasn't sitting. He stood tall behind the podium, one arm raised. A massive map of our rivers and mountains loomed behind him. "My fellow citizens," the old man's voice began, steady and powerful. His words rippled across the airwaves to every corner of the land. "I am the commander of the Supreme Action Group. I regret to inform you that according to the latest data from the National Science Council, due to intense solar activity and shifts in the Earth's crust, within the next 2 weeks, the world will face an unprecedented catastrophe. The surface will no longer be suitable for human survival in the short term." Even though I was prepared, hearing those words made my heart go cold. Hearing those words come from the highest level of authority made it real. For millions of people, it felt like the sky was finally falling. Some collapsed where they stood, paralyzed by the weight of the announcement. I watched as people's legs gave out from pure terror. Others covered their mouths in shock, trying to process the impossible. But then, the old man's voice rose again like a sudden crack of thunder, shattering the growing despair before it could take root. To preserve the flame of our civilization, the highest authorities have reached a decision. The emergency response plan is now officially in effect. Codename, Shangri-La. Your country is not abandoning you. Did we have enough supplies for everyone? The answer was a resounding yes. As long as we stand together, we will endure. The image on the screen shifted away from the podium. It revealed the massive operations hidden deep within the mountains. Qinling, a subterranean city so grand it looked like a miracle of engineering. A gigantic dome glowed with light as bright as high noon. Resource warehouses stretched to the horizon alongside endless production lines. Everything we needed was right there, ready and waiting. And at the center, a nuclear fusion reactor hummed with limitless power. This is our insurance policy. This is the new homeland we have built for ourselves. I am wielding the full power of the nation to issue the first evacuation order. Effective immediately, the entire territory of the country is now under military control. I need every single resident to listen closely. High-speed trains, planes, buses, and private vehicles. Military convoys will provide transport day and night. So remember, do not panic. Do not cause a disturbance, because as long as you stay calm and follow the instructions, the authorities will make sure that you are safely transported into the subterranean city. The old man's gaze sharpened with an intense gravity. It felt like he was piercing right through the screen, looking directly into every panicked soul across the land. We, the people of Daxia, mastered the Great Flood 5,000 years ago. And 5,000 years later, we will overcome this obstacle too. Move out. End of broadcast. The world plunged into a brief, deathly silence. 3 seconds later, everything exploded. But the massive riots everyone expected never happened. In Modu, inside a high-end office building,